right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this event. You've been very brave. You've seen Brussels at its best. Strikes, a march, rain, a broken elevator, broken coffee machine. The coffee machine will be fixed by the coffee break. But thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. My name is Marilyn Fieschi. I'm the CEO of Science Business, which I'll introduce in a minute. But we are here today to talk about semiconductor research and transatlantic cooperation in the field. This is an event that is co-organized by Science Business and CSIS, so CSIS being the Center for Strategies and International Studies, a prominent Washington-based research policy think tank that has a special emphasis on international cooperation and industrial competitiveness, hence this collaboration. So I want to formally thank and welcome our CSIS branch, and I'll let Sujay introduce CSIS in just a second. The chip sector, well, that has attracted a lot of attention. The sector as a whole have benefited from big buckets of dollars and euros on both sides of the Atlantic. And this is good news. This is good news for the corporate champions. This is good news for the research organizations that do semiconductor research. But it seems that the sector is also crystallizing many of the trends that tend to rule international collaboration these days. More politics, difficult geopolitics, trade tensions, but also the ambitions on all sides of the world to be more self-sufficient, to increase innovation capacity in the field of semiconductors. And that comes with national strategies. The US Act on one side, the EU Act, CHIPS Act on the EU side. And then you can add the French 2030 strategy and the Dutch technology strategy and the German strategy. And it goes on and on and on. So how much space is there between these different acts for international collaboration and transnational and transatlantic collaboration in particular? Well, this is the main question on the table today. I will leave experts speak about that. I'm not an expert, but this is what Science Business does. We bring together the world of research, policy, industry in the same room to air new innovation approaches and to facilitate cross-border collaboration. Science Business, for those who don't know, we are a news company specialized in research and innovation policy. We are also a communication platform. We run a network that brings together universities, companies, government agencies. We organize events all year long. This is the last one of the year, finally. But we're delighted to see you. We will, if you have any questions about Science Business, do ask. All right, there's a newsletter to which you can sign up for free. There are 25,000 subscribers. If you want to hear about the network, happy to answer any questions you may have. We are here all afternoon at 6 o'clock. We will go 2 floors up for a reception, a Christmas drink. So we'll take you, but there are stairs if you don't want to wait for the elevator, otherwise it's going to take an hour to bring you up. But again, so that's it from me. A warm welcome to CSIS. And now I will give the floor to Sujay Shivakumar from CSIS for a word of introduction and a welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to join Marilyn in welcoming you to this workshop on Chips Meet Chips. I didn't realize the coffee machine was broken. I mean, we'll have a riot, I think, in the room soon if we don't get that fixed soon. My name is Sujay Shivakumar, as she pointed out, and senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a leading national security think tank headquartered in Washington, D.C. National security think tanks normally work on issues of, as the saying goes, tanks and ships and so forth. CSIS recognizes as a leader in the national security agenda and national security space and as such sets that agenda. And I think innovation today is an important national security focus. We want to emphasize that innovation and the systems that support innovation are really central to the shared prosperity and security of both the United States and Europe. So as relatively mild chip shortages that we experienced during the pandemic shook us out of our complacency about how reliant our industries and our economies are on semiconductor chips. As you know, chips run our world, how people work, communicate, recreate, and it's on the basis on our banking, transportation, and other essential platforms. I think we also awoke to the understanding that there's a much greater need for resiliency in the research and manufacturing networks that cooperate to make these chips. And we found troublingly that we depend overwhelmingly on production in certain geographies, and that this is increasingly, both geopolitically volatile. And as our senior advisor, Charles Wessner, points out, East Asia continues to be the subject to the caprice of the earthquake gods as well. So the US CHIPS Act is an effort to address this vulnerability, 39 billion in grants, loans, and loan guarantees for chip manufacturing on US soil, and another 13 billion for semiconductor research and manufacturing and workforce training. And in turn, the EU CHIPS Act will involve at least 43 billion euros in identified public funding with the expectation that this will spur additional private investment. What we see then is a shared strategic vision, a shared strategic need to grow out the connections across our respective semiconductor ecosystems, because together we are more resilient and our economies are more secure. So what we also see, and which will be described over the course of this workshop, is that firms, research performing organizations are already working to make these new stronger connections work across the Atlantic. And these developments are both significant and welcome. So these strategic needs and the practical developments need to be connected by supportive policies, both in the United States and in Europe, and indeed support and mutual trust are in many ways important to fostering strong and resilient innovation systems that are resilient and promote research and development activities. So CSIS sees the need to convene this workshop in Brussels as a way to begin the conversation, reaching out across the Atlantic. Of course, extremely grateful to Science Business for helping us organize this very important meeting and to contributing so much in terms of both logistics as well as substance, helping make this happen. And it's now my pleasure to invite CSIS Senior Advisor Chris Fall and his panel to get the conversation rolling. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon. As Sujay said, my name is Chris Fall, and I'm currently the Vice President for Applied Sciences at the MITRE Corporation back in DC. And I think we, share a similar sort of outlook and mission to Science Business here in Brussels. Part of our role for our country is to convene. We don't have a role in any particular technology, but this idea of convening different interests, bringing them together, looking for commonality and looking for opportunity is something that we do. I'm thrilled to be here. Congratulations to Science Business and CSIS for convening on this really, I think, timely and important topic. Brave, I would say. And thrilled to kick off the discussion today with the first panel. We have three phenomenal experts. You see Eric Lin on the screen there, representing the CHIPS R&D office at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Yari Kinaret, representing the EU CHIPS joint undertaking here just to my right. And Barry Johnson, representing NSF's new Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate. I don't think we call it an experiment because it's in law, but it's new and they're finding their way, and that's interesting. And more because a lot of folks are online. I know you all have programs with bios. I'll give a brief bio as the panelists speak for those online. Look, the goal for the first panel is really to set the stage. I think that for the conversation for the rest of the afternoon, highlight the features of the microelectronics legislation, both in the U.S. and in Europe. Maybe look for commonalities. I know, we're representing official positions and organizations, so I'm sure there are some constraints, but I think we can explore the commonalities and maybe look for some of the frictions between there and discuss those, and I think that will help us. These are very complicated pieces of legislation. Help us prepare the conversation for the rest of the afternoon. So I'm, in particular, looking forward to the educational opportunity. I am peripheral to the microelectronics a little bit, in the sense that I don't represent an agency or so forth, and so I'm looking forward to understanding some of the details that might not be so apparent. So what we're going to do today is spend about 10 minutes each with an expository. I think some folks have some slides, but the opportunity to do just what we talked about, and that's explain the various positions. I know Barry in particular, it's a little bit more about the wider innovation opportunity, regional innovation, national innovation, but the two representatives from the respective CHIPS components will be able to talk a little bit for 10 minutes each, and then we'll open the floor to questions from you all or conversation. So we'll have about 20 minutes at the end to explore this a little bit. So we'll start with Eric Lin. As I said, he's the Deputy Director for the CHIPS Office at the U.S. Department of Commerce. He was previously Director of Materials Measurement Laboratory at NIST, our National Institutes of Standards and Technology, where he oversaw quite a broad portfolio. I'm not going to read through all of it, Eric. He holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from Princeton, along with master's and PhD in chemical engineering from Stanford. He's had a number of awards, including a very significant presidential early career award for scientists and engineers in the Department of Commerce. So, Eric, why don't you go ahead and start off, and I'll take a seat for about 10 minutes, okay?
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you very much for having me. It's really been an honor to be here and to represent CHIPS for America. And Sujay, thank you for setting the stage so well. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. The team at CHIPS for America has been very busy. We've been working hard, and we're really excited about the progress that has been made so far and for what is coming into the near future. We're putting together quite a number of set of different programs from the incentive side as well as in the R&D programs. And we're really working hard to make sure that they work together with very clear objectives, and while still doing so in stages so that we can show activity and get participation as soon as we can, while keeping our eyes on the longer term impacts that we'd like to accomplish to get to. I'd like to spend the day today because I imagine that most of the audience is pretty familiar with the basics, and Sujay's background gave a really good high-level overview of where the CHIPS Act came from, its reasons for why it was passed, and the directions in which it's moving. But before I go into some specific updates, I'd like to emphasize that CHIPS for America is a whole of government effort, and that for us in the CHIPS R&D office, we work very closely with our colleagues in the investments program. We work across the federal government, have many conversations with Barry, for example, and the rest of the team at NSF, and with our allied and partner nations. We regularly and consistently engage with industry and academic partners, and all of this is in service to building a robust, high-value ecosystem that will energize domestic semiconductor manufacturing and catalyze the innovations of the future. And so one way we think about it is that the incentives program certainly has brought a lot of energy into quickly and purposefully bringing domestic semiconductor production onto domestic shores. And on the R&D side, along with our federal R&D agency partners, that our mandate is to ensure that the breakthroughs of the future are consistently discovered, deployed, and used within the United States. And the way to do that is to really take advantage of the strengths all across the US system and to align them toward some shared goals. Now, let me just move into a few updates and to give you a sense of what it looks like as we try to build the CHIPS for America Act. So let me just give one highlight from the incentives program, and that's from yesterday. So yesterday was a significant step. It was not a large step, but a significant step in which we announced the first preliminary memorandum of terms, we call it a PMT, with BAE Systems Incorporated. And that announcement is for approximately $35 million in federal incentives to modernize their microelectronics center in Nashua, New Hampshire. This microelectronics center is a designated trusted foundry by the Department of Defense. Now, this investment is important to U.S. national security and will strengthen the defense industrial base. And specifically, it's to help quadruple the capacity for MMIC chips and cut their prices in half. The funds will also be used to replace aging tools with the latest technology and equipment. Now, this is just the first of many funding announcements that will support projects across the United States, with larger projects to be announced in the coming months. Now, one note to prepare for that is that each announcement and deal will be different, and it's a reflection of the innovative approach we have taken, outlined, you can read on chips.gov, and really speaks to how to really design each award to accomplish the goals in the best way possible. Now, on the R&D side, we are really focused on our top 3 goals, and those are first, to maintain and extend U.S. technology leadership in the most important foundational technologies for what semiconductor manufacturing will look like in the future. The second goal is to accelerate the innovations to the commercial scale, basically faster and more cheaply, and there are plenty of barriers and opportunities to do so. The third goal, also very important, is to build a robust workforce development ecosystem, because the ideas and deployment commercial scale is executed through people and their motivations and their ideas and thoughts. And for all these goals, we do need to bring not just a whole of government, but a whole of all the people involved in the ecosystem to accomplish these goals. Now, let me just go through a couple of recent highlights on our programs. And our 4 major programs in R&D, of course, are the National Semiconductor Technology Center, the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program, the Metrology Program, and the Manufacturing USA program within 1 up to 3 institutes. Now, let me go back and specifically highlight a recent announcement for the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program. So in late November, just a few weeks ago, we announced that approximately $3 billion will be invested in research and development to secure America's advanced packaging capabilities, along with its vision and strategy for the NAPMP, which is the program's acronym. You can get more details from the vision strategy paper that's on chips.gov and a recorded webinar with even more details by the director, Subbu Iyer, and George Orji from the CHIPS R&D program. Now, this program has a grand vision that by the end of the decade, that the U.S. will be home to multiple high-volume advanced packaging facilities and a global leader in commercial scale advanced packaging for the most advanced chips. The vision and strategy paper outlines 6 investment areas that we have selected, plus an outline of an advanced packaging prototyping facility that will collectively establish a foundation to reach this ambitious goal. And as you'll see from the vision strategy paper, a lot of the same themes about how do you integrate programs, how do you bring teams together, how do you accelerate shared goals and elevate the competitive landscape is one that will be continuing all through the programs in CHIPS R&D and across the government, as well as how we are working with our partner and allied countries. Now, for this program, the first area investment for the community to apply against will be focused on the topic of materials and substrates. And our plans are to release a funding opportunity in early 2024 that have more details about how that will happen. Now, one of the flagship programs for the CHIPS R&D office is the National Semiconductor Technology Center, the NSTC. And the NSTC is a focal point for the R&D programs, one that we envision to bring the community together to address the biggest challenges and opportunities for semiconductor technology, provide resources and capabilities to accelerate the development of technology, and to sustain the development of the workforce. So in a sense, it has thematically and philosophically the same value and purpose that we've described with our sponsors today about convening people together. In this case, we are adding facilities, capabilities, labs, people, and resources. And so that's a very exciting proposition. Now, from our NSTC vision and strategy paper, we did outline that we would be establishing a purpose-built independent nonprofit to operate a public-private consortium. And over the last several months, it's really exciting that we now have that nonprofit organization stood up. We had a selection committee of distinguished and experienced leaders to identify a board, and they did an incredible job for the country. So now we do have the inaugural board of trustees. It's chaired by Jim Plummer of Stanford University and includes Robin Abrams, Craig Barrett, Reggie Brothers, Nick D'Onofrio, Donna Dubinsky, and Erica Fuchs. And we're working closely with them very hard to be able to establish this organization so we can start to execute and implement the vision of the NSTC. Now, our other two major programs, the Manufacturing USA program, where we're connecting the Semiconductor R&D network with the Manufacturing USA Advanced Manufacturing Institutes, a network of public-private partnerships, and our metrology program, which is building and enhancing the NIST mission-oriented laboratory programs on measurement science, all foundational for what is needed in semiconductor technology. And we'll be giving more announcements about what is to come in those programs and how external parties can engage with us also in early 2024. Now, the last program I'd like to highlight is around standards. And I'm from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so standards is literally in our name. But more importantly, standards and our missions in NIST, which is to promote innovation and industrial competitiveness, really looks at standards as an enabler to really gain accelerations in technology if we find the right standards to be able to provide a playing field that everyone can elevate in their competition of. So what was very exciting is that in the fall, we convened a standards summit that brought together leaders from standards development organizations, industry alliances, domestic and abroad, organizations both domestic and abroad, and academia. And this summit was to bring leaders together to discuss standards needs and specifically opportunities for where standards can accelerate innovation in semiconductor manufacturing technology. We also spent a lot of time thinking about how to enable a diverse standards capable workforce, as the standards activities really is a human oriented activity in service to how the technology can advance. Now, this summit was an amazing event catalyzed by many of the dynamics that Sujay set up in the beginning of this session. We had 7 standards development organizations coming together representing 4,000 plus companies, trying to identify and talking about where the future of standards could help this industry. Now, the standards world is usually pretty sleepy, but for this event, we had over 1,000 registrants and over 250 in-person attendees. And since September, we now have this week the first 2 standards workshops on topics that really show promise for how standards can accelerate technology, actually starting today. So there are 2 workshops this week, and the first one is on chiplet interfaces as a technical standards workshop. And later this week on Thursday and Friday, it'll be a digital twin technical standards workshop. So you can go to chips.gov to learn more about them. But I think, and you'll find that when you go through them, that it has very much the same theme of how do we bring parties together, identify challenges, and align towards goals that will accelerate for the benefit of all. And then plenty of details to work out to be able to realize that vision. Now, for today's topic, CHIPS R&D, we are engaging with allied and partner nations regularly. Certainly, the shared interest and shared values of the spirit for how we're aligning our interests overall has been very productive and very exciting. So in the same spirit of where we started, building a high-performing community and network that both catalyzes ideas and helps bring them to scale will help all involved. And that's if we are able to take advantage of the strengths of each of the partners and have very clear guidelines and frameworks for the terms under which we work together. Now, this is not easy. In many organizations, it's hard enough just to work with the department next door. But certainly, the benefits that come from working together are certainly worth it and merit the hard work and detailed discussions that are needed to us to seize the opportunities that lie in front of us. So again, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Eric. I'll go ahead and stay here since it's a little crowded up here. And let me introduce Jari Kinaret. He's the executive director of the CHIPS Joint Undertaking, and with that, working to foster research, development, innovation, and future manufacturing capacity in the European semiconductor system. He's held positions in Copenhagen and Gothenburg, and he was also the director of the €1 billion graphene flagship research project dedicated to exploring the potential of graphene. He holds a master's degree in theoretical physics and electrical engineering from the University of Oulu. I was just there last Monday. It's very cold this time of year.
Yeah.
I'll just say. And a PhD in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Look forward to your presentation.
Could you pass the clicker?
Yes, I assume it.
We'll find out if it works. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Oulu is on the same latitude as Fairbanks, Alaska, so it may explain the chilliness. Okay, I will talk more about the CHIPS Joint Undertaking than I will talk about the CHIPS Act, but and it would have been very good if this had actually worked. Let me see. Let's try this button. That works a little bit better. So what is a CHIPS Joint Undertaking? So first I'm going to explain a little bit of vocabulary. In Europe we have quite a few of so-called public-private partnerships where public bodies such as a member state or the European Commission works together with private bodies such as industries. And they typically have a long lifespan. They develop a number of things that are rather practical. They can be established in many different forms. The weakest one is as a contractual partnership. Then some are legal entities in their own right. And those that are legal entities in their own right are often called joint undertakings. Like we are one joint undertaking. And there are altogether something like 9 or 10 of them. And most of them are established by law in something called the Single Basic Act. So strictly speaking, legally we are separate from the European Commission. But for many practical things, you need to look pretty carefully to see the differences. So we typically follow many of the same procedures and routines as the Commission. So the CHIPS joint undertaking was established very recently in September, I think September 21st, through a change or amendment in the Single Basic Act. In our case, we have sort of 2 different kinds of public bodies. We have the European Commission and as one, and then we have 27 EU member states as the other, plus a couple of associated countries like Israel and Norway, for instance. And then we have 3 industry associations through which there are several hundred industries that can make their voice heard. So typically when we fund things, money comes from all 3 sources, from the European Commission, from the member states, and from the participants, from the industrial participants. So indeed, we became a legal entity on September 21st, so as a CHIPS joint undertaking. I personally started 3 weeks after that, so I'm like really fresh in this job, under 2 months at this point. So what do we actually do? Well, in the CHIPS Act, which I'm not going to describe, in the CHIPS Act there are a number of different pillars, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, Pillar 3, addressing different issues, some similar to what the previous speaker discussed from the US point of view, and some different. Like it's obvious that the crisis a few years ago was a great motivator for this thing. What we as the CHIPS joint undertaking do falls into Pillar 1, and in particular it falls into a few different parts, like building infrastructures and engaging in some research activities. Cut in a slightly different way. So we, while we became a CHIPS joint undertaking in September, we had a history before that, and our history was called Key Digital Technologies Undertaking. And Key Digital Technologies Undertaking supported electronic components and systems research, usually on high TRL levels. Then in September, we took over, but we still continue the kind of activities that KDT did. We also got a bunch of new tasks relating to specifically to chips. So we will deal with pilot lines, design platform, competence centers, and quantum chips technologies. Our money comes from European side, comes from a couple of different budget items, Digital Europe program and Horizon Europe program. And in this transition from KDT to CHIPS, there were some tweaks in the governance structure. So our overall budget increased from 1.8 billion to about 4.2 billion euros. And the countries that are involved are marked here in dark blue, the member states, and light blue, the ones that are participating through European Economic Area, and then the green ones that are associated countries. And then you are asking what is this one grey country in the middle, the UK. The UK is about to become an associated country from January 1st. So then we will have to do recoloration of this map. So our activities, we sort of in-house, we have lingo that the inherited activities from KDT, those we call non-initiative, and the new things we call initiative because they are related to the CHIPS initiative. And in terms of money flows, it's very well defined how much money we should use for the legacy, the KDT activities, how much money we should use for the research part of the CHIPS things, how much money we should use the competence building of the CHIPS part. And all this adds up to about 4.175 billion. But because of the way we fund things, if we put €1 in, the member states have to put €1 in, and the industries have to typically put also, if not quite a full euro, then a fair part of a euro. So all in all, this is like a transistor, if you wish. We control this relatively small thing, or use this relatively small thing here to control the larger flow. If you like this kind of a technological comparison. Yes, maybe we'll move on. So in concrete terms, what we have done now already is that we have launched calls for 4 pilot lines, where we are going to put in 1.67 billion euros. We expect that the member states will put in as much, so altogether it adds up to about 3.3 billion. Very soon we will have calls for national competence centers, 1 competence center per country. We will work on publishing a call on a design platform that allows people to design chips, even if they don't have manufacturing facilities in-house, for instance. And this is the current situation. We are right now in the phase of finalizing the second set of calls. So the first set of calls, these 4 pilot lines, there is one on the sub 2 nanometer with an overall budget of 1.4 billion. Then there is one on a special transistor technology, fully depleted silicon on insulator, 840 million. Packaging, we have also recognized that packaging is an important topic. As in the US, we put a fair bit of money there, and then one on wide bandgap materials, a little bit smaller budget. The calls are open, they will close on the last day of February, and hopefully the projects will start late this year by building the pilot lines. The pilot lines may be operational in maybe 25 or something like that. And I do believe that was actually my last, almost last slide. Sorry, international cooperation seems, prudent to touch upon that here. There is relatively little about international cooperation in the CHIPS Act, but there is a communication document which states that indeed collaboration is good, and we need to form a balanced partnership with like-minded countries. Like-minded may be varying from time to time. I mean, people change their minds, and there are different politicians in power. But we have already launched a very small call with South Korea on a couple of specific aspects on low TRL topics. When it comes to joint activities with the US, situation is less developed, and I really have to refer you to the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, where they are creating politics. We are only implementing politics. So that I think was actually the last slide, and we'll leave the questions until later.
Thanks, Jari. So it's been determined that cooperation is good. We can check that box. Okay. Last but not least, Barry Johnson is the Division Director of Translational Impacts in the National Science Foundation's Directorate of Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. Barry was formerly the founding president and executive director of the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing. He also is currently on detail to the National Science Foundation, but still holds the position of the L.A. Lacey Distinguished Professor of Engineering at the University of Virginia. Barry earned his bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in electrical engineering from the University of Virginia and is the class of 2016 National Academy of Inventors Fellow. He is also a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Barry?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and have an opportunity to participate in the conversation. What I want to describe in just 4 slides essentially is some of the activities at the National Science Foundation as it relates to the U.S. CHIPS Act. And I'll take just a moment before I move to the next slide to say a couple of things about the new Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships at the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation created this new directorate, we call it TIP, in the spring of 2022. That was actually prior to the CHIPS Act being approved in the U.S., which was in August of 2022. And so NSF had the authority to create TIP and did so with an express purpose. And then the CHIPS Act actually came along and did a couple of very positive things. It further defined what the Congress wanted TIP to do. It also authorized funding levels for various activities within TIP. And if you understand or follow the U.S. Federal system of budgeting, it requires both an authorization and an appropriation. As far as CHIPS is concerned, NSF was appropriated $200 million to focus on workforce development. And I'll describe what we're doing with those resources in a future slide. But TIP is now almost 2 years into its existence and has been doing a number of different things. But CHIPS is obviously at the center of it and TIP focuses, though, on all of the activities of the National Science Foundation. I do also serve as the CHIPS point of contact for NSF. So as Eric mentioned, he and I collaborate quite a lot with other colleagues at NSF and the Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, and Department of Energy on CHIPS-related initiatives. The last thing that I'll say on this slide, just as background on the division that I'm responsible for, the Division of Translational Impacts is a division that has been around for quite some time. It was previously referred to as the Division of Industrial Innovation and Partnerships. It's home to the small business programs that we run, where we fund startup companies It's home to I-Corps, which is an entrepreneurial training program. It's home to translational research activities, entrepreneurial fellowships, all activities that are focused on moving ideas out of the lab and into the market. When TIP was formed, this division was moved over and became part of TIP as a starting point. The other thing that I think is important about TIP is just to get a sense for how critical this is to the National Science Foundation. The first year that TIP was in existence, our budget was about $450 million, including most of the things that got moved over from other parts of the National Science Foundation. This most recent fiscal year 23, which ended September 30, 2023, our budget for TIP had doubled to approximately $900 million. And so significant investments being made by the National Science Foundation, by Congress and the taxpayers into this activity, which is focused on several things: advancing key technologies, semiconductors being one of those, accelerating the translation of ideas from lab to market, addressing societal concerns, including climate change and other concerns that we have globally, and then creating a workforce that helps accomplish all of the above. So those are the four main activities in our mission statement for the Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. So how have we at NSF approached CHIPS? First of all, we have been investing in R&D and workforce development within the semiconductor sector for quite some time now. We've been a part of a multi-agency activity on nanotechnology for well over a decade. In fact, probably well over a couple of decades. And so what we took as an approach was to leverage our existing programs, and I'll show you some examples of that in a moment, so that we could move forward quickly. I mentioned the workforce development money of $200 million that comes in 5 years, $25 million in fiscal year 23, 25 in our current fiscal year, and then 50, 50, 50 in each of the subsequent fiscal years. And so we wanted to be able to move quickly with last fiscal year and invest that $25 million. So we leveraged existing programs, and I'll show you what those are in a moment. We also feel like workforce is obviously a critical component of it, and so we wanted to expand significantly fellowships and scholarships to create a diverse workforce or talent pipeline that can help not only the semiconductor sector, but others as well. So we are funding significantly community colleges in the U.S. Those are 2-year colleges that focus on training and certifying and credentialing students in certain technology areas. We wanted to then grow the research activities that we're supporting as a foundation and advance the work of a large cadre of graduate students and faculty members and postdocs at our universities within the U.S. And then finally, we wanted to double down on public-private partnerships. And I'll show you a couple of examples of those and mention those in more detail as we move through. So what are the key activities that we're undertaking? And have 2 slides. I don't have time to say a lot about each and every one of these, but I do want to highlight them, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go a little bit further along. We have an executive steering group at NSF that I lead that was focused on what are we going to do in the CHIPS activities. And so the first thing that we did was we inventoried all of the semiconductor and microelectronics activities that NSF supports. This, as you might imagine, was a long list of activities that we've had going for many years. The director of NSF asked us to narrow that down and prioritize that list. He actually asked us to do 3 in workforce development, 3 in research and development. We got it to 7 in each of those. We were unable to get to 3 because the list was, dozens long when we started. And this group that represents all of the directorates at NSF was able to agree and prioritize 7. And you see those in workforce represented in this slide. In the upper right-hand corner, advanced technological education, we fund training of technicians in various technology sectors. We have 4 semiconductor centers that are in this program, and we have a dozen or so projects that are funded across the United States that are explicitly supporting technician training and curriculum development within for technicians. So ATE, the NSF scholarships in STEM, STEM as we call it, is a scholarship program that's focused on funding students from underrepresented groups to get an undergraduate degree in a STEM-related field. And you can see some numbers here. We've touched more than 100,000 students in nearly every state since 2006. Research experiences for undergraduate. We have a collaboration with the Semiconductor Research Center where we support an REU site that's focused on semiconductors, supporting those students to get them into a lab, to get them some exposure and some experience in the semiconductor sector. In the upper left, experiential learning in emerging and novel technologies, that is a program that supports internships, collaborations with industry to enable a student to go out into the real world from their community college or high school and get an experience in industry. In the lower left, we have three programs there. One is the intern program, which provides funding for graduate students to go off to industry and do a 6-month internship. And so we work very closely with industry. In engineering, for example, I'm an engineer. 75% of the engineers, PhD graduates in engineering in the US go to work in industry. But I would argue that most of them are being trained as if they're going to be academicians, when less than 10% are actually going to have an academic job. So we are supporting those students to be able to go off and work in industry for up to 12 months. They can do this in 6-month chunks and go off and get some industry experience. We also have a CS for All. If you look at some of the reports from the semiconductor sector, a large percentage of the needs in the workforce are going to be computer scientists. And so we have a CS for All program that's providing support to increase the availability of computer science degrees for students. And then finally, supplements to access semiconductor fabrication. In the training of graduate and undergraduate students, it's one thing to be able to design and simulate a chip. It's another to be able to design and simulate, get fabricated, and test that chip. So we're providing supplemental funding to enable those students to have access in collaboration with industry to fabrication capabilities. And then finally, the next slide shows some of the R&D programs that we have supported. In the middle is a program that we launched a couple of years ago. It's called the Future of Semiconductors, FUSE as we call it. This is a program of basic research that's in collaboration with industry. We have 4 semiconductor companies that are co-funding the activities that we're supporting here. Intel, IBM, Ericsson, and Samsung are the 4 companies that are supporting this activity with NSF. And as implied in the middle there, it's focused on co-design. What we're looking at are applications that are going to drive the need for new devices and new materials, but also new materials that are going to drive the ability to create new devices and enable the creation of new systems. And if you go around the circle, you'll see that we have a Quantum Leap Challenge Institute program. We have a Next Gen Systems for Infrastructure, Resilient and Intelligent Infrastructure. We have a Future Manufacturing program. We have a National AI Research Institutes program. And then DEMREF, which is Designing Materials for the Future. And you can see the levels of investment that we've been putting into these programs. Some of these are going to drive the need for new semiconductor devices. Others are going to develop the basic materials that will enable the creation of new semiconductor devices. So these are some of the research programs that we're supporting, again, with our CHIPS initiatives. But keep in mind that, and this is not a complaint, but keep in mind that the money that we have from the CHIPS program is all focused on workforce development. The other investments shown here are NSF investments out of the resources that we have available as a foundation. And then finally, I do want to highlight 2 key partnerships. So I mentioned that we wanted to double down on partnerships. We have a program that we announced with Intel. in September of 2022 that's focused on training of students for the semiconductor sector. And you can read the details there. It's focused specifically on our technician training program and our STEM scholarship program. And then finally, NSF and Micron announced a partnership in October of 2022 that's also focused on workforce development for the semiconductor sector. But this is focused on the creation of training materials and curricula for semiconductor workforce development. We're very happy, very proud of these two partnerships. And I will close by saying that we're open as far as partnerships are concerned. We, as you can see, are working with global companies on these partnerships. We also are welcoming additional inquiries about partnerships and would invite those to reach out if you have interest in collaborating with NSF on these and other activities. And so with that, I'll stop, and hopefully I didn't go too far over my time limit, and look forward to the conversation that we're going to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Can we bring Eric back up on the screen? And I'm going to hand this microphone to Greg Arcuri from CSIS, and we have a second for folks in the audience. And where are we with, how much time do we have? 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, I would like to ask the first question and then give folks in the audience here, and I don't know if we have provision for online questions. Yari mentioned that there is an explicit provision, I'm paraphrasing obviously, explicit provision for cooperation in the EU CHIPS Act, but obviously, para activities suggesting it's a good idea. I wonder, Barry and Eric, can you comment on the U.S. CHIPS Act and whether it speaks to the issue of international cooperation explicitly? Either
I
of
can
you?
start, Barry. There are areas where it is identified but not called out specifically in terms of like actions and activities to engage in. There is another part that in the CHIPS Act, the CHIPS for America Act, that did fund the Department of State. And the Department of State does have, I believe, $100 million to establish projects and programs with our partner and ally countries. I think they're working through that currently. And if I remember correctly, don't hold me to it, there is a focus on supply chain. And so for the EU joint undertaking, if there is a supply chain analysis, then for us in the United States, that effort is being coordinated by the Department of State. Within the R&D and the incentives programs, we do take that cooperation as a high value activity for engagement for sure, and to align shared interests, but it's not as explicit inside the legislation itself.
Great.
I think, and thank you, Eric, for covering the CHIPS Act. I mean, NSF does have a significant international program. We have an Office of International Science and Engineering. Specifically in the semiconductor sector, we've launched a couple of activities. We have a program in collaboration with Japan that's called Upwards. And Upwards is an acronym that stands for University Partnerships to Advance Workforce in Research and Development in Semiconductors.
Wow,
Hopefully
good.
I got that right. There are 11 universities involved, 6 in the U.S. and 5 in Japan. There are 2 companies involved, Micron, who's a U.S.-based company, but heavily investing in semiconductor fabrication in Japan, and then Tokyo Electron are the 2 companies that are involved in that initiative. And that is developing curriculum activities, developing support for students, training at the universities, and experiential activities for those. So we have significant activities there. I think it also is important to point out that in fact, I'm not aware of any semiconductor company that I wouldn't consider a global company. I'm told that Intel, for example, is the largest employer in Ireland. They're making significant investments throughout Europe and other parts of the world. And so I think certainly, we feel that this semiconductors in particular requires a collaboration that's more than just U.S.-centric. It's a global collaboration.
Right. And that's sort of where I wanted to go. And one more to Yari before we, if folks are going to have some questions, great. And that is that, you know, in the U.S., clearly we conceive of the CHIPS universe as multi-agency. We call it whole of government. There are drips and drabs of resources across all sorts of organizations that typically do already collaborate significantly internationally. And so whether or not the CHIPS Act says you will collaborate, we have these relationships already. And I was wondering, Yari, if you can comment on the degree to which the EU CHIPS Act is dovetailed and intersects other programs, you know, more or less.
Yeah, if you allow, I will broaden the question a little bit.
Yeah.
The largest EU-funded research program, Horizon Europe, typically participation is open globally. Participation is different from getting money. I think the funding is often restricted to countries that are not as developed. While US organizations can participate in most of the projects, I don't think that they can get funding from the EU. So that is one thing. When it comes to funding through the joint undertaking, international collaboration is more complicated because we have this mechanism that member states have to put as much money, and it's the member states' interest to fund organizations that come from that member state. So it may be difficult to convince them to put their domestic research funding to organizations that they don't regard as domestic. But you are also very right that many of the organizations that are involved in our program, you would think that, well, these are maybe not European organizations, but they have a European presence, legal presence, and therefore they are eligible for funding. Like, say, Intel, for instance, I'm sure, and participate in several of our programs.
Great, super. Well, let's turn to the audience for questions. We have one here. Sir, what's your name?
Hi, my name's Ali.
Let's do the microphone because there are people online. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Ali Yazgiri. I work with European External Action Service, US desk.
Are we on with the microphone? Turn it on? Yes, no? Close it.
So, okay, new try. My name is Ali Yazgiri. I work with the European External Action Service, the diplomatic service of the European Union, and I work on the US desk. I cover everything related to trade, digital, and tech, in particular the TTC that was mentioned before. I wonder, I mean, I have a question in relation to intellectual property and intellectual property rights and transatlantic cooperation and the prospects for cooperation. And I'm asking this from a perspective, let's say, you know, fast forward 10 years, if you look at intellectual property rights and in relation to economic security, for example, I'm looking at what happened on 17 October with the lowering of the foreign direct product rule. So I think it's both an, let's say, a question, an economic question, but it's also maybe a security question. What are the prospects for transatlantic cooperation if we look at, you know, some of these elements, economic security elements, and also some of the executive orders that are coming out of the White House? For example, invent here, make it here. So what to make of this? I would be interested to have your perspective on this.
Right. Why don't we go around? Yari, you want to start? Or no?
I have absolutely nothing to comment upon that. That's outside my core competence, so I will happily pass the buck.
Great. Barry, Eric? Yeah, go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. You know, it's an incredibly important topic. That's one thing. We understand that. We do have a group at NSF that's working on developing a better strategy along those lines. But I'll give you an example of something that we have tried just recently, and it has to do with the Future of Semiconductors program that I mentioned. I mentioned that there are 4 companies involved, Intel, IBM, Ericsson, and Samsung, and they are jointly funding. So they're putting real cash into that program as we are to fund the activities, the research that's being conducted at U.S. universities. So we're funding U.S. universities. But all 4 of those companies get a royalty-free, non-exclusive license to the technology that comes out of anything that's funded in that program. Regardless of which university it's funded at, they have the right to that license. And it's not just for research and education purposes. Sometimes licenses are restricted in that way. This allows commercialization. So it's a non-exclusive, but it's royalty-free, and it's provided to each of those 4 companies for anything that comes out of the research that we're funding at those universities. We were, to be honest, we were wondering how the universities might react to that, but we were overwhelmed with proposals coming in, more than 10 times as many requests for dollars in funding than we had dollars to actually support. So it was quite a significant and overwhelming response from the community. But that's an experiment. We will assess and see how well that worked, and we are trying to look at that model as well as others that we might use moving forward on how best to handle intellectual property.
Eric, any quick comments before we transition to the next panel?
Sure. Yeah, I think I acknowledge it's a very difficult challenge and a very difficult issue. There's no doubt about it. And we are working as well on how to best frame that. I'll just say that there's not just one single approach and answer to it. And so there's plenty of work in pre-competitive space. That's an area where NIST has really been centered. And so when you start with pre-competitive space, that elevates where everyone can go so that competition is just at a higher plane. And then we can move into many of the tools and instruments that Barry described into how to harmonize them. So it might be segmented, it might be stitched together in ways that are intelligent and suit to purpose. But certainly that issue is one that is worth working on to gain the benefit again at the end.
Great. Well, look, I'd like to think we have to transition, but we're just warming up. There's plenty of opportunity this afternoon. I do want to thank our 3 great panelists. Very low pressure jobs you have here to execute something that no one's really paying attention to. So, should be easy, right? Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and answers to the questions. And okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next panel. After what I hope you all agree was a very stimulating discussion in the first one. One of the things that has made this cooperative meeting with business science and CSIS so productive is that we're not talking in general terms. We're actually talking with active players in the semiconductor space, players across this global industry. There were a couple points raised in the last meeting, which I hope will be explored here in part. One of the things is managing expectations. It's generally important not to think that the European Union is going to send vast amounts of money to American companies, particularly if they're going to be in the United States. If that seems strange to you, then I would like to welcome you to the modern world. The flip side is that we shouldn't really expect large amounts of money coming out of the American Congress going offshore. That should not be considered a problem in either case. It's how the world works. But cooperative research is possible, and that's the topic of this session. And there was several references, particularly from Barry Johnson of NSF. Much of the best cooperation is coming from private industry funding that cooperation. Why do they do that? Well, either because they're very generous companies, or maybe they think they need to do that for their own livelihoods. So we're going to talk today about the cooperative opportunity which is a very real one, across the Atlantic, indeed elsewhere in the world as well, but today just the Atlantic. And I like to talk about the opportunity, but when I talk to some of my colleagues, it sounds more like an imperative rather than just an opportunity. So I will, in the interest of brevity, for those of you who can, Gert Bergen, who will be our first speaker, is a Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at IMEC. IMEC is one of the most phenomenal cooperative research organizations in the world, although there are some others represented up here as well. And they have been around for, I think, over 40 years, have had steady growth, and have become a key linchpin in the international research, cooperative research that is instrumental for the further progress of the semiconductor industry, on which we all depend in our daily lives. Gert, could I turn to you?
Yes. First of all, thanks a lot for having us. And obviously the topic of cooperation, as Charles just said, is very dear to our hearts. And we really believe that with the perfect lead out, it's an imperative. Because the whole reason why we are all in this industry is to advance the state of the art and to create better technologies that basically improve the quality of life, which is our goal as IMEC, a not-for-profit research organization. We really want to create technologies that enable us all to have a more sustainable future. And when we look at collaboration, as Charles already said, we are really at heart a collaborative research organization. We have about 5,500 researchers focusing on semiconductor technology that bring together the entire value chain of semiconductor companies from across all the globe, all like-minded countries, to really think about what's next, not 2 years from now, not 4 years from now, but 5 to 10 years from now, which is a very important point. That as a research organization, we work on what we in industry refer to as M+3, M+4, the technologies that will only make it to manufacturing 6, 8, 10 years from now. And if we take a global perspective, basically, to state the obvious, technology is not going to get less complex, right? Complexity is only going to increase. And that means that if we want to accelerate, and I think the whole goal of these CHIPS Act initiatives in various regions, whether it's the US CHIPS Act, whether it's the European CHIPS joint undertaking, whether it's the initiatives happening with the Japan CHIPS Act, the initiatives in Korea, South Korea, obviously, that's all meant to accelerate the development of technology. And when we take a global perspective on that, we really see that each region has unique strengths, right? When there's discussions of attracting, as mentioned before, some of the leading manufacturing companies like Intel or TSMC to Europe, that makes sense because it wouldn't make sense for Europe to try and duplicate strengths that are present in other regions. And this is really the view that we take as IMEC towards collaboration, not only with partners across the Atlantic, but also in Europe and in other like-minded countries, such as Japan, South Korea, which also have very important parts of the semiconductor ecosystem. And that's why when we look at this global map, we really think that the challenge is about really reconnecting rather than deconnecting the world, which is neatly visualized on the next slide. I don't know who's holding the, perfect, sorry, didn't see that was laying there. Thank you very much. Which is neatly visualized here, and that's the main point we want to make, right? Of course, there's geopolitical tensions, there will always be trade discussions, and of course, we are a research organization. It's not up to us to shape policy. We execute policy, as said before by other speakers, but we really believe that if we want to accelerate technology, which is the goal that we stand for, we need to reconnect the different unique strengths across the different regions, which is also why, as part of the discussions, we've been reaching out to partners like New York Creates, with which we have a long-standing relationship, but also other organizations across the US. Of course, many of our corporate partners are US companies, and we'd really like to see how we can each basically be very complementary in the choices we make to accelerate the roadmap, because that's the point we really want to make on this slide is decoupling of these different visions, the vision behind the EU CHIPS Act, the US CHIPS Act. If we decouple rather than integrate forward, we run the risk of actually slowing down innovation. And if there's one thing that we all want out of this initiative, it's to really accelerate the leadership of like-minded countries, both in R&D as well as in manufacturing. And the only way to do that is to avoid the pitfalls that are on this slide, right? If we continue the decoupling, we duplicate research, we will increase the cost and we will effectively slow down innovation, which is the worst possible outcome for research organizations, but also for all of the different companies we have in our economic ecosystems that depend on them. That's really the main point that we want to make, is that we really believe that There is a strong need for collaboration between like-minded countries across the entire value chain. And IMEC, as a collaborative research organization, has been very active over the past couple of years, but also before that, in reaching out to our peer research organizations to make sure that we can turn this complementary research into practice, right? It starts with talking to each other, understanding what are the ambitions of organizations like New York Creates and others, what are the ambitions of our corporate partners, and how do we, together with all the partners in the US, in Europe, craft a roadmap where we make sure to leverage each other's strengths and to create mutual dependencies that drive strong trade relationships and where basically each region can benefit from the strengths of the other across the Atlantic. So for the sake of brevity, I'll keep it at that. But to us, that's really the key point that we want to make is we've always been open to collaboration. We really see the increasing complexity of the roadmap. If we ever want to get atomic channel CFET transistors, just to throw, obviously we're a scientific technical organization, just to show one technical goal in there. If you want to make that a reality by 2032, which we're now hoping to target together with the partners, we're going to have to screen as much materials in the next couple of years, just the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to have to screen as much materials as we had to screen in the last 40 years of our existence to get to the point where we are today. I think that's the most straightforward example that I can give. There's many, many more, but the increasing complexity only requires us to collaborate more. If we start decoupling the innovation, we will slow down, and the challenges only require us to integrate further. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very eloquent and I think a very effective case for why we're here. I would just retain one key thought about the importance of talking to each other. And would note that what's interesting is that the ones most active in this space, who are the players, not the observers, they're all talking and they're all cooperating. A quick question for you. Have we seen decoupling among like-minded states as of yet?
No.
No.
And that is really what we want to emphasize, that we are on the right track. The right conversations are happening, whether it's at the level of the Trade and Technology Council, whether it's at the level of bilateral conversations between different departments at the European and at the US level, whether it's between different partner organizations or between different companies, obviously, in Europe and the US. We are on the right path, and it's imperative that when we move to implementation, both on the European and on the US side, and we start allocating budgets to specific roadmaps, that we contain this alignment and we continue to drive this complementarity. That's really the path forward, and we're seeing the right signs.
Thank you very much. I'd now have the privilege and genuine honor of turning to David Anderson, who is the president of New York Creates, which some people know as the Nano Center in Albany, New York. I remember many years ago, a colleague at IBM advised me that if I was interested in semiconductors, I should go to New York. I paused and thought, it's pretty cold up there, and they wear ties. You know, how could there possibly be semiconductors? And I came to learn that there are indeed. We are particularly grateful for Dave Anderson to be here because IMEC is not in Brussels, but it's not so far. New York Creates is a bit farther than that. And if I may reveal a detail about your travel, Dave was kind enough to arrive this morning and won't be leaving for Tokyo until this evening. So we owe him a round of applause for endurance, I would think.
Thanks, Chuck. And as Andres put it out on the microphone situation, really leads for a call for lower power chips because my battery seems to have run out. But you know, as far as international cooperation, I think Gert said it all. We do plan and we have been continuing in discussions. We have had cooperations in the past and continue to have cooperations today and have further discussions between lots of the R&D entities across the globe. I'll talk a little bit about NY Creates since actually I'm on this. Can you put the slides up? Because most of the audience here is from Europe, may not be as familiar with NY Creates as others. but it really is an acronym, and that acronym is the New York Center for Research, Economic Advancement, Technology, Engineering, and Science. So quite a mouthful, but it really does embody what we do at NY Creates. We are probably better known as Albany Nanotech. That is the largest entity that we run. It's a facility in Albany, of course. Albany's the name. It's about 1.5 million square feet of research facility with an on-site high school, university, and many industry partners working together, about 150,000 square feet of clean room and about 40,000 square feet of lab space. And the clean room is 300 millimeter, and we have about 20,000 or 25,000 square feet of 200 millimeter clean room space. But in that, we work with industry partners very similar to IMEC, although I believe our models are slightly different. But as we continue discussions and work with each other, as we talk with IMEC, as we talk with Leti, Fraunhofer, the Korean institutes, and across the globe, we find that while we have many similar capabilities, we have slightly different and very synergistic and complementary focuses. And so we maintain focus on those so that we're not having, we're not disengaging, but there may be some duplicate capabilities, but we really find the areas where we can cooperate and find synergies. For example, as Gert said, they're N3 to 5, they're further out in technologies. We're a little closer to manufacturing. So we can take some of the results of IMEC programs and put them into a full flow manufacturing line, improve them to get them closer to manufacturing. So we have many partners on site. We have 3 primary anchor tenants, we call them, IBM, Tokyo Electron, and Applied Materials. But we have over 500 partner companies, particularly quite a number of small and medium-sized enterprises and startups that we engage with on a regular basis, as well as universities programs. And so we have programs in workforce development where we work not only with universities, but with community colleges, high schools, and so forth, to bring those STEM students through to careers. And we do that through not only our AIM Photonics, which is a Manufacturing USA program, but directly through New York Creates with internships, apprenticeships, co-op programs for students, and so forth. We also have veterans programs where we work with the U.S. military with the 120,000 or so exiting veterans coming out of the services. We have a program called VetStep, which provides them direct hands-on training at our facility and at our partners' facilities, so that during the last 6 months of their service, they're able to get trained in the industry. And we've been doing this about a year, and we have a 90% placement rate of veterans that come through that program going directly to work for companies in our industry. So we have the slides back up. I'll just say that the 3 primary pillars of our capabilities are research and development. That's our primary focus. Albany Nanotech being the largest. We have a test assembly packaging site in Rochester that's associated with our AIM Photonics packaging and microelectronics packaging. Also have a heterogeneous integration 3D packaging full flow line in Albany in our current facility. So we're working on R&D with industry partners. We have a focus on economic development, and it's really to drive the innovation economy around the region of the Northeast as well as across the nation. And in fact, we're helping others now across the world. In fact, we're working in Japan with Hokkaido to try to create a Hokkaido Creates as Rapidus is building their fab infrastructure there. And of course, education and workforce and training. And I think the key, like IMEC, we've been around for more than 20 years and have developed a sustainable model. And as we look at CHIPS funding going into entities, it's difficult to build new facilities that duplicate what exists in other places and have them be sustainable over time from an operations standpoint. So it's important to recognize the models that work and re-emphasize and re-energize those models. I've already talked about some of our partners, our large partners and small partners across the globe, but I think equally important is we have established relationships with many entities, research entities around the globe, and continue to develop those and expand those partnerships as we grow. We're probably most well known for advanced logic processes because of our successful relationship and partnership with IBM in that space. But from a standpoint of what we do across the board, we work in many different types of memory technologies, neuromorphic computing, quantum computing, bio devices and so forth, heterogeneous integration and packaging technologies, quantum and even power electronics and photonics. This is a picture of our site. As I mentioned, it's quite a large facility, and talked about the workforce programs and the success there. But I think most importantly, just given the time, yesterday we announced a new $10 billion program with a $1 billion investment from the state of New York to create a high numeric aperture EUV lithography center, where we will begin a partnership with Micron, IBM, Tokyo Electron, Applied Materials, and many others that is created a new building on our site. So we're adding an additional 50,000 square feet, which will house the high-NA tool that will be delivered towards the end of 2025, and close partnership with ASML in that. It was announced by the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, yesterday, and so that's just in the press, and we're very much looking forward to partnering with our program. And as we look to the CHIPS and Science Act of what's been defined as the gap from lab to fab, really this is the space that New York creates, as well as our partners at IMEC, our partners at LEDI, many of the Korean research institutes and Japanese research institutes are in that space, and it's absolutely essential we collaborate to do that, because research and development of semiconductors is very expensive, and it doesn't make sense to duplicate capabilities around the globe when we can partner, and that's our objective. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a compelling case, and could I congratulate you on that announcement? I think it's worth noting that, if I'm not mistaken, much of the funding, the other $7 billion, came from the private sector. Is that?
Yes, there's $9 billion coming
$9
from
billion,
private sector and $1 billion from the state of New York.
Right.
Yes.
Well, not every state in the U.S. Can do $1 billion in their spare, out of spare change. So I think that underscores the importance of these institutions, because the entry costs are extremely hard. Trying to create new ones is fiscally and in some respects, in terms of the supply chain, not really possible. I mean, getting a new ASML lithography machine is not something you walk down to the local store.
Not every research lab can afford that.
Or simply get one delivered. But in any case, I think this is one of the most important things that we're hearing here today, is the fact that these research institutes themselves are not wondering whether they should cooperate and not debating IP, however important that is. They're cooperating, and where IP can be intractable sometimes, you get attracted by working at it, and they have a proven track record of cooperation. I'm now privileged to turn to Andreas Schumacher, who is the Executive Vice President of Strategy, Mergers and Acquisitions at Infineon. Infineon is a well-known German company, as I'm sure you know. Andreas has a particularly distinguished career there, responsible for strategy and acquisitions and many other things. At the same time, it's a company that has a major presence in the United States. And we are particularly, Dr. Shiva Kumar and I are particularly grateful for his contributions in every form to the innovation project at the CSIS. You've been an excellent partner, and we look forward to continuing to cooperate with you. Please.
Thank you. And let's see, do we have the microphone on? Thank you. Yes. So, Chuck, thank you for the invitation. And with a kind smile, I can't help but observe that I'm actually the first semiconductor industry executive on the panel here. So it's wonderful to be at the center of so much attention and also money. And I'm also the first participant who doesn't bring slides, which is probably also a first for a company executives. But to your question, or to the subject more broadly. As we were talking about transatlantic cooperation and R&D, the way I would phrase the question or the challenge is really almost at a personal level. If you, Chuck, and I were to engage in transatlantic cooperation on any subject, what would we do? We would both focus on what we want. We'd have to make up what the goal of that cooperation is. We would hopefully focus on our mutual strength, and we would hopefully work together on a level playing field. And I think many of those aspects have already been touched upon, so I'm going to be very brief, just to re-emphasize them. The second one, we got a wonderful introduction already. The semiconductor world is complex, yet there's also a tendency to go for what is referred to as the most advanced semiconductors, which often is associated with the smallest node size. And no doubt this is an impressive engineering, manufacturing, and R&D feat. There are other aspects of semiconductors which are equally fascinating, and some of the distinguished speakers before that mentioned, for example, wide bandgap semiconductors is one example. We were talking just before the mics went on about the need for power-effective semiconductors so that those microphones would actually work longer. So replicating all this research, whether it's at an R&D stage, an RTO stage, or at a corporate stage in various regions of the world amongst like-minded allies, I think would not be a smart thing to do. And eventually, resources being finite, not only in Europe, but eventually perhaps also in the US, this would come to haunt us. So my first argument would be one for focusing on strength, as we as companies do, but also for the RTOs and as well for countries or for states like the European Union. The second topic about focusing on what we want, what is near and dear to our heart, I think for us as a company is relatively easy. We have a clear strategy, so it's really for us to work with organizations like in Europe, the joint undertaking, with IMEC, with Fraunhofer, and many others, to make sure that our input, what we consider as important when it comes to, for example, designing and elaborating the pilot lines of the joint undertaking, which was briefly mentioned upon, or when it comes to perhaps shaping guardrails of the US CHIPS Act in a way that make them useful and applicable to us as companies. That's the second part. So the cooperation between research organizations, also government when it comes to the CHIP office or the European Commission with companies is the second point. And then the last one, very quickly, this level playing field also was touched upon in the context of IP with a question from the audience beforehand. We currently see all over the world not only the promote aspect of semiconductor policy and R&D taking shape, but also, and the executive order from President Biden was mentioned, the October 22 and October 23 export control restrictions were mentioned. The European Union is thinking in similar directions, although maybe not as advanced yet. So the deny aspect, for lack of a better word, the protect aspect is also taking shape. And for a global industry and for a global company like Infineon, it's easier to operate globally if those playing fields are level. And I'll leave it at that, and back to you and to the fellow panel members.
Well, thank you very much. And I think it's what I appreciate about a number of your observations is that they're realistic. In conferences like this, there's always a danger that we talk about everything going for the best and the best of all possible worlds. And actually, we live in the real world, and it gets a little bumpy sometimes. Trying to balance the global semiconductor supply chain, which is intensely globalized, with national security concerns, which sadly seem to be real, is a very difficult thing. And I think we've heard from our colleagues before about the importance of transparency, predictability, and equal application. All of that is quite literally the subject for a potentially very productive discussion at a further meeting. One of the underlying points in your talk is, again, the importance of talking and not wondering what the others are going to do, but meeting with them and talking about what are the concerns and how can they best be addressed, which I think is core to Dr. Shiva Kumar's program at CSIS, is how can we make this work better for everyone. But let me turn to the audience here. You have to remember I'm a professor at Georgetown, and your grades will not be good if there are not some good questions that are come forward. Do we have a question?
Our alliance, generally speaking, is based in three parts: in USA, in Europe, and in Japan. In the semiconductor industry, what our opponents, the Chinese, what the level of research? Because as we are closing them the gates in the semiconductor industry, which is very important for us, for our technology, they have announced that they are going to create their technology so that to compete us on that. Do you know where is the research level of theirs? Thank you.
The question is, do we know the research level that China is currently at and how they're progressing? Certainly I think they're challenged by some of the export control restrictions that, limit technologies going to there. But they, clearly have a significant number of engineering and science graduates on an annual basis that outpaces many of the other regions around the world. They have the ability to do some of the advanced packaging type techniques and so forth. So developing, broader applications with lagging generations of devices, but they're not resting on that. I think they are continuing to advance their technologies to try to compete with the rest of the world. It's certainly evident in their AI chips that have recently been announced and various things. And so I think, it's going to be a competition, but we are a global industry. Nearly all of the large companies have operations in China and will continue to do so. And I think, a lot of the end products are built there. And so again, there has to be, yes, clearly we want to restrict some of the technologies, keeps us in business, but the end products are built there. It's a large market. Companies want access to that market, and it will continue to advance as quickly as they can. I don't know if you have addition.
Well, I think you summarized it really well. Maybe one thing to add to that is, there is a lot of discussion, obviously, at the geopolitical level on restricting access to technology. But as we all know, technology is very complex, but it's also a full stack innovation approach, right? There's obviously a lot of discussions on access to certain electronic design automation tools, access to certain sets of equipment. But if you look at it from a holistic perspective, if there's a certain application that you want to deliver, let's say AI model training, there is innovations all across the stack, right? And what we are seeing is that at the design and architecture level, which is also extremely important, there is actually great innovations also coming out of companies like Huawei, which have been at the mobile SoC platform for a very long time. They have, as they've already said, a very, very well-educated talent base that looks at ways of achieving the same application performance goals, even if you have restricted access to certain technologies which are currently being discussed. So what we are seeing is effectively that from a policy perspective, it's a really hard question what the right strategy is. But one observation is that there is many ways to deliver a certain performance, and they are definitely, from what we know, also with the latest publications on the latest Huawei chip manufactured by SMIC. But that's just one part of the stack, the manufacturing. If you look at design and architecture innovations, we're also seeing some very impressive work being done there. But that's also, to me, reiterates the point that if we want to stay ahead, the only way to stay ahead is if we, within the like-minded countries, really bundle the best of the best and have clear, to also Andreas' point, have a clear focus on what it is that we want to deliver. Let's say, for instance, if we want to really retain our lead in AI model training and inferencing, that's really a full stack innovation approach, down to specific algorithm development, the way that you build custom accelerators, the way that they're implemented with novel components design-wise. So really picking the right battles and then making sure that we have a holistic view on how to address it all across the technology stack is really the way to keep leadership. But there's no doubt about it, they are definitely trying to catch up and trying to regain the lead.
Well, you know, I think that those answers capture some of the complexity of the policies that have been implemented and mirrored by the complexity of the industry. But there are also some clear lessons, I think, particularly for U.S. and certainly, in my view, for Europe. One is that the Chinese have a high sustained focus on the industry, and they also do. They also actually put money. They invest over and over again at substantial levels. They educate their students, and they are the very best are directed into this area of national priority. If I were to outline what I think Europe needs to do in this space, it would include that focus, the sustained commitment, both in terms of policy and in terms of funding. And, you know, there's a tough statement here. It's, as you heard each of these gentlemen say, this isn't cheap. This requires quite a lot of money if you're going to play in the space. It's the classic, if you want to play, you have to pay. And at least as much as we were encouraged by Dr. Lin's presentation, I think it's worth keeping in mind that sustained long-term commitments is not always a hallmark of American policy, and we may be challenged there. I think the principal challenge in Europe, but I'd be interested in your views, maybe scale. So let me turn to you. And
if I could just add on one comment you made, a topic which is very near and dear to my heart. You mentioned that manufacturing semiconductor R&D is not cheap. Yes, that is correct, and there has been sustained investment, for example, in China, other countries as well, into that industry, where, in my opinion, the biggest competitive advantage in the future lies really is in talents, in the a number of a number of the previous panelists mentioned that already. So all these expensive lithography machines, the multi-billion-dollar fabs, they're ultimately run by people. The development is done by people, and so it heartens me very much to see that both as parts of the U.S. CHIPS Act, as of course part of the NSF efforts, but also in Europe, where we have excellent universities, we have excellent research organizations. We put the effort in. We need the people, we need to invite people from other countries to Europe, to the United States, to contribute their knowledge, their diversity, and come with the aspiration and the heart to really bring the semiconductor industry, but also many other areas of life, of modern life, forward. So perhaps that's a big plus we can put in the column of US and Europe versus other countries of the world.
well, actually, I think you typically identify a really key point there. Let me ask your two colleagues here, one of the things that troubles some in the U.S. is that as much as we're educating, and we heard the NSF efforts to increase our talent pool, but some in the industry believe strongly that we need to import more high-quality talent, and failing to do that could be, both in Europe and the U.S., could be an impediment. But I'd be interested in your view, Dave, and then perhaps you, Bert.
Well, yeah, I think, we need the talent in the industry. And, in the US, STEM graduates would prefer to go to work for what they call big tech, the Googles and Apples and that sort of thing. And because semiconductors, you ask any kid that carries around a cell phone how it works, they really can't tell you, but they know there's there's apps in there. And so, they think they can go make $1 million on an app and not have to work too hard in the semiconductor industry. But, we're changing that perception. We're building the perception of the semiconductor industry being exciting and a place to be where you can have now a whole new career in creating the products that create the way we live today. And so that's changing, but I think we also need to recognize the talent around the world, because it certainly does bring a whole different perspective from a diversity standpoint, a different way of thinking, and all of those attributes bring advantages to developing next generations of technologies. So I think we need both.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Maybe to add 2 points, right? I think to be very positive about this, there has never been such a spotlight on chip technology in the recent decades, right? So if we don't take this opportunity as a sector between industry, research organizations, everybody involved, to turn that into the best marketing campaign for the impact that the industry has on everyday life, yeah, then it's our missed opportunity, right? It's right in front of us. All we have to do is grab it by the scruff and execute on it. And there's many examples. It's become blatantly obvious with the supply crisis we had for the automotive industry and the impact that's had on car sales globally. But that's just one point. There is innovations across all different sectors: healthcare, obviously the climate transition and this transition towards more renewable energy won't be possible without semiconductors. So it's really about bringing those stories and enthusing people that see it as, yeah, okay, indeed, as Dave perfectly said, computer science and software engineering seems more straightforward and more fun to do, but it's up to us to really bring the stories that enthuse people to pursue a career in semiconductors. And the second piece I want to add is when we talk about global talent, there is a huge untapped talent pool sitting right in front of us, and it's actually called female students. And we really need to put a lot more effort into getting even more women in technology and semiconductor technology. And that, if you combine that, because it's about enlarging the talent pool, right? Nobody in the industry wants to move people around and hire from each other. So that doesn't work. The only thing that works is not the next employer branding campaign to make sure that more people come to us versus New York Creates. That's not the way to go, or to anybody else. It's about really enlarging the talent pool for the entire semiconductor industry as a whole. And they're getting more women into semiconductor technology, but also thinking very positively and very constructively about economic migration, and the perfect way to execute that in a constructive way, I think, are essential elements that we have to tackle, because it's just a demographic reality, right? There's very few continents where the population is still young and growing. And if you look into the future, 30, 50 years from now, we will be dependent to keep growing the talent base on very concise economic migration, which goes into training programs in specific regions that you want to develop. So there's a lot of work cut out for us, but now is the right time to do it. We're basically on the wave of the biggest marketing campaign we're ever going to get. We have to execute on bringing those stories to enthuse the generations that will be in university and that will be in our industry 20, 30 years from now. So it's up to us to live up to the moment, I would say.
I think that's very well said, and I would only add that I hope that the financial incentives, both in terms of their scale and continuity in Europe, will help meet that challenge. If we want to meet the climate challenge, then we need to invest in chips. And I think the point that you raised, Andreas, on it's not just the smallest nanometer chips that matter. That these no, it's true. That if you want to do electric vehicles and address climate, then you need the microprocessors at the appropriate level, the power chips that will direct that. And the competition there is about to become very, very fierce, not least because we're directing Chinese efforts, perhaps unwittingly, but more into that sector. But the last message as we close here, I just think is important to underscore, is that these gentlemen represent not only an outstanding semiconductor firm, but the two best, along with some other colleagues, of the cooperative research centers. And as their name implies, they are actively cooperating. Well, sometimes I think in policy circles in Washington and in Brussels, they're fussing about whether or not cooperation should work and on what terms, whereas these guys are running with the ball right now, because that's what the industry requires. So thank you very much for this excellent discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those of you on the line, thank you for your patience while those of us here in the room get ourselves sorted out. And if you're, those of you online, we had earlier mentioned that there was one of the coffee machines had broken. I'm happy to report that it's been fixed. And that we have a very content and caffeinated room over here. So it's all systems go. So we in this panel, I think we are going to talk about the E word that we have successfully avoided until now. I speak of the dreaded word ecosystem. And of course, innovation systems or ecosystems are basically networks of networks. And so what this panel will be talking about is the challenges of building local networks and the challenges of connecting and learning across these networks as well, both nationally and across the Atlantic as well. So this third panel will explore ways in which the United States and Europe are approaching the challenges of strengthening their semiconductor value chains, from high-performing coalitions of academic and industry partners through skills and training programs. And so I hope we'll also explore regional economic impacts of CHIPS investments, as well as challenges pertaining to the allocation of resources across regions in a meaningful way. We have a fantastic panel with us today. Devanand Shenoy is the Principal Director for Microelectronics at the U.S. Department of Defense. We have Patrick Bressler, immediately to my left, the Director of International Cooperation at Fraunhofer. Naomi Verstaeten, the Chief Innovation and Technology at Brainport Development. And last but not least, Christina Vicini, from the EIT Digital. And I think she's a board member of that organization. So very welcome to all of you. I think we will just follow the pattern of the previous panels, and each of you take some time to describe and explain your perspective on why innovation ecosystems enhance the cooperation, what needs to be done to grow these ecosystems, because it is a connected system, so to speak. And so I was wondering whether if I could first turn to Dr. Shenoy to get things started.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I've got a few slides. I'll get started. Firstly, I want to thank CSIS for organizing this event and for inviting me to Brussels. I've certainly been enjoying it. It's a wonderful opportunity to visit Europe and find out what Europe is doing when it comes to chips. So the presentation is actually focused on an area called DoD Microelectronics Commons, which is funded through the CHIPS and Science Act. Out of the $52.7 billion, $2 billion for the DoD is for DoD's Microelectronics Commons.
It's still there.
So before I talk about the commons, if I could go to the next slide. I want to set the context for how important semiconductors are. As you can see, there is really strong support from the administration for semiconductors. This very first excerpt is from Executive Order 14017, the Biden administration's supply chain resilience, which refers to how fundamental semiconductors are to the operation of virtually every military system. And then the second excerpt is from the National Defense Science and Technology Strategy for 2023, and it talks about how we'll be accelerating ideas into capabilities which is critical for microelectronics, and that's indeed what the Commons is trying to do as well. And then the last one, refers to the CHIPS for America, the vision and strategy document from the Department of Commerce, NIST. And there we talk about how NSTC will be able to support technologies emerging from the microelectronics commons. So there's really strong synergy across the agencies, as you can tell. The whole of government approach that's been alluded to in the previous panels, that's illustrated to some extent with this graphic here. What it shows is how there's a lot of support for that early stage research, but really translating that research into prototyping, scale up, commercialization, productization, that's a tremendous challenge. Requires a number of stakeholders to come together, requires a scale of investment that's much higher than at that early stage. And so that's what's shown here. Even as we funnel some of those ideas from that early stage into prototyping, there's both the microelectronics commons as well as the NSTC that will help support that maturation of technologies that are being supported. And in the future, of course, there's going to be private capital source of investment. There's also programs that are supported through my office, such as the SHIP program, RAMC, and so on and so forth, which refer to maturation of technologies coming out of the commons as well. So there's multiple pathways we can think about. So the commons is really focused on 6 technical areas which are relevant to the Department of Defense: electronic warfare, secure edge, Internet of Things computing, artificial intelligence hardware at the edge, quantum technology, 5G, 6G technology, and commercial leap ahead technologies. So commercial leap ahead technologies are those technologies that commercial industry has not yet identified as opportunities. A really good example that I keep citing is gallium nitride technology. 15 years back when DARPA supported gallium nitride, it wasn't recognized by commercial industry as an opportunity. Now it is ubiquitous. It's in communication devices, networks, and so on and so forth. So those are the kinds of commercial leap ahead technologies we want to support in this category, which is fairly broad, obviously. Again, what is depicted here is that, challenge of taking research from the laboratories, whether it's university labs, whether it's startups, small companies, and so on, trying to ensure that there is a pathway to get to prototyping. Because a lot of these entities, like universities and startups particularly, don't have the access that they need, whether it's EDA licenses, whether it's IP, whether it's access to foundries, and so on. So we want to try and democratize access to those capabilities that are critical to be successful with lab-to-fab prototyping. So that's what the Commons is going to help enable. The additional challenges, when you think about hardware microelectronics, it gets even more challenging because you need patient capital, and venture capital is typically not available to support those kinds of investments. And so the microelectronics commons funding, I consider to be that patient capital, at least over the next 5 years. And in those 5 years, we'll ensure that there's partnerships that we build with commercial entities, with defense industry-based companies, as well as other programs. For example, programs of record, which is what the DoD uses for acquisition systems. Those are all going to be partners in the future. So we have recently awarded 8 hubs. So hubs are essentially the organization that do the research. And so these are the hubs that we have awarded. The Applied Research Institute, Arizona Board of Regents in Arizona State University, Stanford University, the Master Collaborative, the Midwest Consortium, North Carolina State University, the Research Foundation, the SUNY, as well as the University of Southern California. So these 8 hubs that are geographically dispersed across the US will support those 6 technical areas. And in fact, as you can tell, there's a tremendous interest in this. There were 642 unique organizations that applied to be part of this Microelectronics Commons network. So the Microelectronics Commons network is essentially the network of these hubs, and each hub obviously has a number of members, as well as what are called cores. Cores are these foundries or the manufacturing facilities, the fabs that could be, including places like IMEC in Belgium, so they could all be cores. And so these 8 hub leads, they have diverse organizations that are part of the hubs. We have awarded $240 million of funding to the hubs, and these are across 35 states, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. And in terms of the membership, there's 430 plus members right at the start. This is just getting started, and it's already 430 members. And out of those 430 members, 381 unique members. So it's not any kind of duplication of membership across this network. And there's 215 plus members that are located outside of their hub lead states. So these 8 hubs are obviously located in various states, and these 215 plus members are outside of those hub lead states. Again, demonstrating the broad participation across the US and the strong interest in the Microelectronics Commons program. And 100 plus colleges and universities. As you all know, innovation occurs in the universities in the US. And so we're really tapping into the strong innovation potential that exists across various universities in the US here with this kind of network. So the next step in this process, we have supported the infrastructure with the $240 million. The next step is to support projects. So it's $400 million per year over the next 5 years, $2 billion of investment in the Microelectronics Commons. The remaining funding is for projects, and projects are critical. They support the tooling expenditures, they help increase the capacity and infrastructure that's needed. And in the future, if you think about additional infrastructure, even as these technologies evolve, that's also going to be supported. And obviously help support the talent and technologies in parallel. And what is critical is that these challenges incentivize the collaboration required for the cores to better align with the hubs. Because the cores, the manufacturing facilities or the foundries, they are the ones who know what are the appropriate manufacturing processes to use to ensure that there's productization and commercialization down the road. So the hubs are informed by the cores of what are the appropriate manufacturing processes and so on and so forth. So that's why the alignment between the hubs and the cores is critical. And finally, I want to end on this slide. What I show here is, how we measure success with this network of hubs and cores. So, we want to ensure that there's sharing of resources across various hubs. There's obviously an important workforce development part of this. We want these hubs to be sustainable, the network to be sustainable in the longer term. We want to ensure that there's a commons board representation, there's strong partnerships across this network. And we also want to ensure there's really strong management as well as flexible membership, because it's the flexible membership that allows organizations to come in and grow the network going forward. And we want to ensure that these underrepresented minorities and minority-serving institutions are part of the network. There's tremendous amount of talent and innovation in those organizations. We want to try and tap into that. And what is shown here among the metrics, if you will, how do these hubs and cores develop those memberships, the cross-hub collaborations, the patterns obviously that are being produced in this course. Co-investments from various sources is critical, particularly for sustaining these kinds of networks, whether it's state, local venture capital, private equity, commercial companies, defense industrial base, and so on. There's a number of stakeholders that are part of this network that can help ensure that this can be sustainable in the longer term. Programs of record refer to DoD's acquisition programs. These are the programs that ensure that we can purchase our weapon systems and platforms. Those are the ones that inform these programs. Microelectronics Commons is an example of what are the technologies that are relevant in the future for future operational capabilities. And so those are the things that enable the asymmetric advantage against our adversaries. So it's critical that we support those technologies that are relevant to programs of record. And the hub membership diversity and the students that are enrolled in the Commons funded workforce programs. We've talked about this over and over again. Workforce is a critical part of this effort. For us to be successful, we've got to pay attention to the workforce, and we certainly are doing that in the Microelectronics Commons program as well. And then finally, ensuring that these students that are supported through the Commons transition to the workforce to support the broader industry. What this illustrates is that there's really strong potential for collaboration across the hubs. Although we've talked about these 8 hubs as leading 6 different technical areas, we want to encourage participation across these hubs so that there's no restriction as to any particular hub proposing in any particular technology area. So that's what's shown here. And finally, we have really seen very strong participation, as you can tell. The request for solutions for this Microelectronics Commons was put out back in November last year. And more recently, we held a inaugural Microelectronics Commons meeting mid-October, very strong participation. And then what is shown on the right are some of the hubs and the awards that we made recently. This is a really high-profile program within the Pentagon, which is where I work. You know, the Deputy Secretary of Defense announced these 8 hub awards, and you know, it's certainly been receiving a lot of attention, as you can tell, from a number of stakeholders at the highest levels. And so these various hubs are awarded, you know, roughly $20 to $40 million, as you can tell from these numbers. And then so that's our starting point going forward with the Microelectronics Commons. As the Commons evolves in future years on an annual basis, we will be putting out calls for projects and calls for infrastructure with the 400 million per year that's available in the future years. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, it's really a fascinating description of how both the top-down initiative and framework and then the bottom-up connections are connecting together in a very promising way. The success metrics that you mentioned are also extremely important for this. Next, we turn to Patrick Bressler from the Fraunhofer. I think a slightly different version of how the ecosystem is developed within the Fraunhofer,
Right,
and how
right.
that develops outside
Thank you.
to build up the German economy.
Right. I'll try to give a different story. First of all, a disclaimer. Look, I was born in New York. I can give you the whole talk in 20 minutes or 2 minutes. I'm not too sure how good it will be of an explanation. I wanted to present a bit the Research Fab Microelectronics Germany as a section of Fraunhofer. I'm not too sure how familiar you are with the Fraunhofer Gesellschaft. It's an organization in Germany of 72 fairly scientifically independent institutes, 30,000 staff, 3 billion euros annual research budget. And of the 72, there are 11 that are doing microelectronics research, and they have come together to run or operate this Research Fab Microelectronics Germany, which is a geographically distributed pilot line-like facility or institutes. You see the 11 Fraunhofer institutes, and then there are 2 Leibniz institutes. Leibniz is another non-university research organization in Germany. And these 13 institutes are all the non-university research institutes or labs in Germany that do microelectronics. So this is the common denominator. Then you have the university and you have the industry, but these institutes are in the middle. So in this valley of death kind of perception, we're looking at technology readiness levels of 2 to 3 to start and try to bring it up to 6. Say 5 to 6. We'll go further in collaboration with the industry, but then it's the industry lead to bring that up further. So the microelectronics group itself, which is a subsection of the Fraunhofer Gesellschaft, we're looking at almost 20,000 square meters clean room, 13 clean rooms distributed across Germany, 560 million euros annual budget. Over 50% of that is industrial contract research, and typical 4,500 employees, around 2,800 engineers, scientists, of which the average scientist would stay with Fraunhofer for 5 to 7 years, in average 6. So this is also a kind of a training, a workforce development. The engineers go to industry where the salaries are higher, and they're already been working on the projects for Fraunhofer, so we're happy to see them make their own careers later on. The fab itself, yeah, the hard facts that I mentioned, 13 clean rooms. I'll skip this for time. This is where it is now. These are the clean rooms all over Germany, 200 and 300 millimeter. CMOS focuses the 300 millimeters in Dresden, of course. And these, what you see here on the right-hand side, these are the technology platforms. These are extended CMOS, optoelectronics, power. These are where the institutes come together and coordinate their work and research and make common offers to the industry. So these are the 5 platforms where the work will be distributed, and this is distributed, this is flying wafers. This is actually, there's a management, a manufacturing execution system, and there's documentation protocols, and so these, you can do multiple projects using several of these locations. This is just, okay, I can also almost skip this, but just to give you an impression of the last couple of years, what we have been doing in EU projects. All of these are EU or former KDT or Excel projects, looking at collaboration with other European RTOs, other European industries, and how to work with us? Well, we provide services for manufacturers. We will develop demonstrators and the prototypes. We will go to the prototype. We'll provide the technology services. We'll do collaborative research projects with universities to industry. Industrial contract is the bread and butter business of Fraunhofer. I forgot to mention the crux to the biscuit of the Fraunhofer model, which is for every euro research contract in year one that an institute acquires, it gets base funding from the government, the same amount, €1, the next year round. So a smart institute knows they have to get industrial contracts because that means they get base funding next year round. And an even smarter institute will think about, well, what do I do with this base funding? I have to provide the technologies that will get me the new industrial contracts in year 2 or 3. And of course, we do the technology transfer and the licensing, of course, as that's the payback to the public funding, that we still keep a stake in the IP rights. So how to work with us together? We have a young talent. I mean, the skills part, I'm starting at the bottom. The skills is really an issue. I think the estimates are at least 400,000 scientists and engineers in microelectronics in Europe missing. And I think that's the most important part on this whole slide. So, oh, okay. I could stop here, or I could show you briefly the Advanced Heterogeneous Systems Integration pilot line we're thinking of, maybe that. You've heard of the CHIPS Act and the pillars 1, 2, and 3. In the pillar 1, we're looking at 11 billion euros estimated public investments, 3 plus, so 4 we know now, 4 pilot lines, FDSOI, 5 to 10 nanometers, gate-all-around FET, 2 nanometers, and the heterogeneous integration and advanced packaging, and also a wide bandgap materials pilot line is the 4th one we're looking at. Focus is also about the qualification and competence centers. Workforce development, again, is very important. I'll skip the rest. We're looking at Pillar 1, where the RTOs of Europe are working together, so specifically COA Leti, IMEC Fraunhofer with VTT and Spanish and Italian and other RTOs, research and technology organizations, if I forgot to mention that. Our pilot line is looking into new concepts for heterogeneous integration, so chiplet production beyond the monolithic process. So making chips, 3D, 2.5D stacking, looking at what technology do you need to make the silicon contacts or the through silicon vias smaller to make them compatible to keep up with the front end 2 nanometer or whatever 5 nanometer technologies that are being developed. But the packaging is a separate technology, but absolutely not necessary. It's the back end of the line, needs to be commensurate with what's going up in the front end. And our pilot line is to have several entry and exit points. Let me get to it. Heterogeneous integration. This is a great slide. All of these bullet points are topics that Fraunhofer is working on, but of course nobody would put this all on one chip or one board. Just to show you, it's very complex and complicated, meaning there will be several entry and exit points. Nobody can do all of this by themselves, so this is built on collaboration. And what we want to, well, I'll skip this part too. This is where I want to get to. The chiplet integration, this would be what the pilot line looks like. It starts with the PDKs. It goes from this system design over to test characterization, reliability, and the final solution. customers and partners can come in just for the PDK, or they can come in just for the testing or the integration. We will focus on quasi-monolithic integration. We will not go into power or the other technologies, but these will have interfaces where this will fit in. And of course, there'll be the interface to the startups, to design houses and users. And in the European concept, this is very complicated. Do I really want to explain this? We're looking at a one-stop shop, but we're looking at the other pilot lines. and then the design platform at the bottom with the EDA tools and design libraries, there has to be an exchange. And this is based on collaboration and will not work without. And of course, it's not limited to Europe. So the takeaways are, we want to see this advanced heterogeneous systems integration pilot line providing, addressing these stakeholders from chip foundries to integrated device manufacturers, materials and tool suppliers, semiconductor customers, research community itself, of course, and the startups. And our value proposition goes from the design services over the process development and tool validation to the system development and outsourcing, proof of concept for the outsourcing of manufacturing and the access to the facilities, to our facilities, of course, for other RTOs for academia. And that was my quick run through it. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I think it reminds us that the social and the industrial connections that have to be made are nearly as complex as the devices that are designed and manufactured. So I think this was a really interesting but speed run through some of the aspects of this. Next, my pleasure to turn to Naomi Verstraeten of Brainport Development. You were recently in Arizona. And I think it'd be interesting to hear, your perspective of what's happening in the Netherlands versus what is happening in Arizona, in addition to your other comments and perspectives. Thank you.
All right. So I actually only have one slide, and I wanted to show it quite simplistically, not as difficult as he did, because otherwise I have to talk really fast. But from our perspective, when you look at an ecosystem, there's different types of stakeholders or layers that you have to address. So from an economic development perspective, this is where I'm from. I'm from the economic board in the Eindhoven region. We look at workforce development. That's one of the pillars that we look in. But we also look at technology development. That could be together with RTO, with our RTO, TNO. I saw them on the slide as well. Or the Holst Center, which is a collaboration between IMEC and TNO. But also our technical university and our applied science universities. And then there's the companies. For us, the companies are the most important when we look at the ecosystem development, because at the end of the day, when we want to reach a certain objective within the ecosystem, it means that the companies will do a lot of the research and they will bring the products to the market. So if you look at this slide, what I did here is I looked at basically quite high over it. There's design, there's front-end production, back-end packaging, and there's PCB and system integration. And I also put in photonics, because integrated photonics is very important, a very important focus, besides microelectronics, of course. But we know that it's catching up. In the past, it wasn't there yet, and at first we only had the microelectronics. But for us, we started early on with integrated photonics. And a lot of what you see here came actually forth within our ecosystem from what we call our prime company, which was Philips at those days. And basically from there on, several companies started to spin out, such as ASML, but also Thermo Fisher and many others. And what we are really strong in the Netherlands, not just in our region we're extremely strong, but in the Netherlands as a whole, is actually in equipment and equipment components, wafer fab equipment, which is not just at the front end, it's also at the back end as well. So last week I was in the US, so some of the grants that you talked about that were given to the University of Arizona Arizona State University. We visited them actually, and they talked about it, and it was really impressive. It was impressive to see how they are building their ecosystem. And basically what they are doing is the same way as we do it actually in Eindhoven. So we work with the triple helix model, as we call it, which means that you actually create a strategic agenda with the triple helix. This means the government together with the knowledge and the research institutes and the companies. And based upon that, you set an objectives. And so we went to Arizona with the Flemish, actually, to be honest. It was a joint mission. And we went there to introduce our companies. Many of the equipment component companies from our side joined. And what we saw there was that there's many fabs being built. As you know, in the Netherlands, we don't have fabs. Well, we have a few, but they're small. And we're going to have a fab, which is going to be Smart Photonics, who launched actually a resilient supply chain on integrated photonics. And what we actually did there was seek the connection. So our Technical University of Eindhoven seek the connection with Arizona State University, because we believe that although there's a lot going on in Protect, we still need to promote the collaboration, because we believe that if you work in an ecosystem, collaboration to us is key. So this means it's key also still with partners in the US, because that way we think we can speed up our innovations as well. So this is why we brought our companies and our research institutes and had in-depth discussions also at Stanford, the other one you mentioned in your slide, which is very interesting. There we saw that as well. And I think we believe that there's no one region that'll be able to build everything themselves, because it's a complex, semiconductors is very complex. The supply chain is very complex. So we really need to share the knowledge. So this is what we currently have in the region. We are also working together with the other centers of excellence in the Netherlands. We actually have 4 centers of excellence, and we are joining forces on chip design, because we're good in analog, we're good in RF, and we think we can even become better in that to get a market share within Europe. And the same goes for the front end and the back end, and we see a lot of change happening there as well. So this is how we do it. So we support our companies, but we also, like you had in your slide, we also support our startups, because we think that when you have the startups, you need to support them. That's not just government funding. It's all combination with either corporate venturing or it's with VCs. The Netherlands doesn't have as many VCs as, for example, the US has, but still we support the companies to grow. And we build ventures. This is what we do. So that's one part. And the other part, which is very important, is workforce development. It's been named a lot of times already. Also in workforce development, we think we think we need to increase the global pool, because it's not just in Europe. In Europe, we have 400,000 that will be missing, but it's all over the world. So also in that sense, we still feel that if we are able to share mechanisms or interventions that we do. For example, when you want to go into untapped potential, I think someone in the previous panel talked about women. It's not just women. There's also other people that are currently not in semiconductors. So there's the untapped labor potential that we need to get them into technical studies, even if it's vocational education. So from our perspective, it's not just PhD and masters, but it's also vocational education that we look at. And then there's internationalization. So we keep looking to make these connections internationally to support our companies to find new clients in the US, whether it's in the US or it's in Japan. We do support them in those endeavors. And one of the other things that we do, that's the last thing, is actually develop innovation programs, public-private innovation programs, actually. I think it looks a lot like your model, to be honest. Well, that's what I wanted to share.
This is great, because I think you highlighted 3 things at least. One is just how do you grow the complexity of the commons, because as you grow, as you increase the connections across it, it becomes more functional, it becomes more intelligent, it becomes more capable, and so forth. The other point is the other theme of this conference, which is how what cooperation is already taking place. And I think you very ably illustrated just how the European ecosystem, elements of the European ecosystem, are now working with the American one, and I think it's to mutual benefit. So I think that was another major takeaway from that we can draw out. If I can turn to Christina now, if you could tell us a little bit about what EIT Digital is, and then your perspectives on both in terms of how do we grow this ecosystem, and as well as how do we cooperate more effectively.
Okay, thank you very much. I see my presentation is, there you go. So I'm here today on behalf of EIT Digital, and of course our CEO is much more used to making these kinds of presentations. So I have a number of slides, which I'll go through very quickly. And of course, I have a colleague here to whom you can ask plenty of questions, but I invite you, of course, to look at their website as well, in case you need more information. So EIT Digital, we were talking about ecosystems, and we are here in Europe. Europe itself is an ecosystem that has been built through the years, especially the new Europe after the war, built on peace and economic prosperity. Now, to reach this economic prosperity in the new digital age, of course, we have to go through different challenges. And since Europe was built in various stages, you have various regions in the European territory that have different levels of maturity, different levels of digitalization, different levels of employment in the population. So it is a big challenge. And because of the fragmentation, is something that it's not really very easy to achieve in a very short time. So when I was listening to Mr. Johnson, of course, it was for me being at Christmas or close to Christmas, like in a shopping mall. Yes, I want that. Yes, I want that. It was fantastic also in terms of the budgets. But, our scale is a little bit maybe smaller, but we try to be extremely targeted and extremely focused to reach the goal. So the challenge of Europe is in the digital decade is to develop 1 million deep tech specialists by 2025, and we are at the eve of 2024, and build a diverse workforce spanning 20 million people by 2023. So I don't know exactly where we stand, digital workforce and diverse workforce in that KPI, but it's definitely extremely ambitious. So in the digital decade, you see the digital compass. By 2030, we have to get basic digital skills to a minimum of 80% of the population. A population that has, in which digitalization has been accelerated only in the 21st century for real. And also where the business model or the economic model was based on employment. And thanks to the let's say, the innovations in the United States and the model of entrepreneurship and, also the wonderful stories of technologists and engineers creating wealth and wonderful companies from the garage all the way to the market. This is something that has inspired our youth and has inspired a lot of the growth and adoption of the digital economy and deep tech. That being said, there's still a gap. So EIT Digital has the objective of creating a level playing field in terms of deep tech, a level playing field in terms of knowledge of digital, in terms of accessibility of digital, and also in the acceptance and development of entrepreneurship in the digital era. So it's a gateway to digital innovation in Europe. We want to have a competitive digital Europe that is inclusive, fair, and sustainable. And I think that this is very much part also of the European value. And we are looking for like-minded partners and collaborators in everything we do. One of the core pillars of this ecosystem and the basis for this innovation is education, of course. We know that Europe is rich of research institutes, and we have a very good education that is mostly or in large part publicly funded. So how do we build an ecosystem in which not only we have these institutions that are used to a certain business model, and how do we accelerate the model to make sure that we reach this target in such a small time. So in terms of EIT Digital, so we build this ecosystem through bringing together partnerships between education, research institutes, and SMEs and innovators. So we have an ecosystem of more than 500 startups in 23 cities, and I would say absolutely growing each year. And we even have a hub in the Silicon Valley because, of course, we were talking about how Europe grew. And of course, we wouldn't talk about Europe without a strong partnership with, indeed, the Atlantic countries. We have various programs in terms of summer schools, master schools, deep hacks, jump starters, 60 universities, a talent pool of alumni that is already 3,500 alumni rich. It's important to know that EIT Digital started only in 2010. So we are really in the acceleration phase of this ecosystem. In terms of innovation, we have venture programs, we have an open innovation factory, access to finance programs, and as I mentioned, the US lending program that allows European startups to reach out to the American market. And of course, vice versa is possible coming from the United States. So in figures, EIT Digital is, of course, an ecosystem. It has an economic objective, but it's really an impact organization. So it's really to increase the penetration of digital. And why is digital important? We were talking about semiconductors. You cannot have workforce in semiconductors without having an educated workforce in mathematics, in computer science, in electronics and engineering. So we are coming from indeed a very fragmented ecosystem, and we really need to put the accelerator on that. These numbers you can see, 1.3 billion funds reached by EIT Digital supported scale-ups from 1,000 plus investors. The investor community is extremely important. These are investors from Europe, but also associated countries. And 180 million plus is the EIT Digital-led strategic partnerships and collaboration through EU projects. So the European Union, through Horizon Europe, through other funding instruments, promotes the creation of consortia that are mixed consortia between corporations, startups, research organizations, and education institutes. So public-private endeavors in order to indeed build this ecosystem from the ground up. We're bringing together academia, research, and innovation to build the competitive digital Europe. And I would like to put the emphasis on competitiveness because Europe is a sandwich basically between the United States and Asia, and where innovation is scaling up extremely fast. And indeed, speakers before talked about the funding. So when you look at the massive amounts that are devoted and targeted to very specific programs, it is not easy to achieve the same level when you have, again, a fragmented ecosystem. So what is nice about the new digital agenda is that you have various instruments and various bodies within European Union, but they're all coordinated towards specific goals. For instance, the CHIPS Act, you have artificial intelligence, you have cybersecurity. So it is taking speed and it is growing very rapidly. So you have here an idea of where the locations are. You have digital offices, and we are in progress of building an office in Lithuania, one in Ireland, and one in Bulgaria. You can see that we go from Estonia, which is a very highly digitalized country, to some countries in Southern Europe that really have to pick up, like mine, for instance. Unrivaled entrepreneurship initiative. to create this entrepreneurship, we need to start indeed from education. So we promote with Master School the creation of startups, and we have a cycle of funding, and we we coach these companies, we bring funding, we take equity shares, and we lead them, we put them in touch with companies and actors in the ecosystems where they can get funding and access to market, so that they can grow as quickly as possible up to unicorn, hopefully, through the collaboration also with the European Innovation Council. As you know, 100 billion devoted to deep tech and strategic technologies, not only semiconductors and quantum, but also biotechnology, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite an ambitious program, but for the moment, it's bringing its successes. So these are 3 examples of scale-ups or startups that have been successful. So 6 million in Series A round, 30 million Robotech undisclosed Series A round. But so the pilot phase 1 is finished in collaboration with the European Innovation Council. And don't forget that when they get to the European Innovation Council, they get tickets of 2.5 million in terms of grants, but also 50 million in equity through the European Investment Bank, sorry. This is slow, silent investors, and the EIB is also a patient investor, or the EIC fund is a patient investor, and facilitates the connection with future venture capital funds as soon as the value of death is crossed. So this is quite effective and is being very successful. So regarding EIT Digital, the objective is really building skills for the industry. We have 8 master's programs. You can see them there. And when we can talk about cybersecurity, data science, and when we talk about semiconductors, we talk about a special program that was created in embedded system very recently. Building skills across Europe with the Université Côte d'Azur in France. We have a new program with the Quantum Computing and Information Summer School. And you see the countries with a star are the countries that are now leading in creating programs for semiconductor industry. So these are, I go back, of course. I'm almost at the end, don't worry. Yeah, Estonia, France, Finland, Hungary, and Italy. And hopefully more countries will follow. This would not be possible, of course, without the support of industry. So we have a great collaboration with ST Microelectronics in Italy. And this collaboration is only one of the many. Semi.org is the global industry association representing the electronics manufacturing and design supply chain. And so this is really a call for action for all the various actors in the semiconductor industry to really engage with the EIT Digital and see what can be done together, because we have the possibility with all these countries and with all these research institutes to really go deep down into the market and tap into the market for creating really the best synergies. One last example to bridge the deep tech skills gap. Of course, there are professional schools. There are also matching initiatives. So what is nice here is that through the ecosystem, it's going to be absolutely seamless and automatic to have, on the one hand, a job seeker in this environment, in the deep tech economy, finding job opportunities throughout any ecosystem within Europe, because let's not forget, this is really a pan-European endeavor. But also on the other side, we have a war for talent. Companies need absolutely to find the right skills. And through this initiative, we really build the right skills that are demanded by industry, and we create the offer and vice versa. So this is quite exciting. Last pillar of the EIT Digital is the thought leadership, so the makers and shapers initiative. So we have 7 reports that Evangelos brought. So you have all one of them at least on your chair, and you also have a number of interviews. Why are these interviews important? Because they show something that is not only the engagement from very important and known figures, not only in the investment field, but also in the political sphere and in the industry sphere, but also it creates role models. So we were talking about diversity, and we were talking about indeed the women factor, and of course diversity is extremely important, not only in terms of gender, but it's really important to tap into the untapped. But when you look at the gap and the objective, you want to focus as a good investor into the highest scale-up potential. And when you look at the number of women that are currently employed, not only in STEM, but also in the semiconductor industry, it's maybe worth to really give a boost to this ecosystem and this population. So we have awards, of course, with the role models. We have mentoring schemes with the Women Leadership Program, and we have also KPI access to deep tech education. We have initiatives like the Women in Venture Capital report that was published just this year, where we show also the importance of having access to capital, not only for female founders, but also to create enough wealth for women in technology and for women in management so that they can give back and reinvest in the ecosystem. So this is something that is really one of the key values that are supported in Europe. And I think as a woman, I'm very proud of this. I think that this is something that can generate a lot of momentum. And so this is it for the moment. I hope I wasn't too long.
Thank you so much. Well, I think one of the themes that you touched on at the beginning and then later on in your presentation is, this question of how do you achieve the balance between the need to build on existing capabilities, resources, especially those that are in more established or thicker ecosystems, and the push to allocate resources to develop capabilities among more marginal groups or in other regions that have thinner innovation ecosystems. I think a lot of this is sort of it touches on the political side of the ecosystem development challenge. Either you or others on the panel want to touch on how do we create a balance between both those needs?
Well, if I may, I think that the opportunity comes really from the funding. So there are plenty of ideas. On the one hand, there is the need to open, and thanks to the internet, thanks to the social media, it is possible to create this culture of exchange and inspiration from each other. So positive inspiration, hopefully, not the negative one. But yeah, through projects, we've seen how COVID has been a huge catalyst for innovation and ingenuity also. Plenty of ideas came from the bottom up, grassroots. So I think that this example has been very inspirational, and maybe we can indeed open the field a little bit more and leave space to more initiative for this.
Yes, so I think that if you look at this, yes, COVID has been an example in which innovation was spread, and you had digitalization. But I think that if you, I think you need to look at what do you really need, right? What is the type of talent that you need? And then you need to connect with those areas where these competences are either existing already, not just to create a brain drain, but also to start your collaboration with it. This is why I liked actually your slide about the whole different areas within Europe where you have all these talents actually. Because I think that within Europe, since we are a bit diverse It's a bit different than in the US, I think. I think we do need to look into which universities naturally already had these competences that we need, and that we need to form collaborations with them. But also, if you look at Transatlantic, if I look at the US, I mean, while we were there last week, one of the things that I really liked, we were at this college, this community college, the Mesa Plus College it was called, and they really had this program running on tapping into that untapped potential. They've only been running the program for 1 year, but the numbers were very interesting because they really got people into the program that would never have thought to study anything about STEM. And with the CEO of that school, we are currently already talking to see, okay, what did you do? How did you get the people in? Because normally you wouldn't have gotten them in. So this is the cross collaboration that you are looking for. Because again, when it comes down to talent, I think it doesn't matter because we all know that there's a huge shortage. So we need to get together to really develop that talent.
I'll be quick. So, I really think about this as an ecosystem of ecosystems. Semiconductors touch so many different ecosystems. Some are weak ecosystems, some are strong ecosystems. Bridging across ecosystems is mutually providing value on both sides. That's how I think about it.
I would like to draw attention to the fact that if we stick to the supply chains and value, it's so beyond the workforce development part, semiconductors is the most efficient production supply chain you can think of in the world. Also, to produce the wafers with zero error or faults and whatever, no other production or manufacturing industry can actually do that. It's immensely efficient. Every part of the supply chain contributes to the cost. So there's somebody earlier in the other panel was saying, no, semiconductors, the industry is very expensive. Yes, but it's also absolutely efficient, and the products are the cheapest you can make them. If you want to balance this supply chain thing now with strategic autonomy or whatever, you're going to make things more expensive. So it's a trade-off. How much more are you going to tolerate a price rise in the price for an autonomy, and or not? And you have to trade this off, and that's one thing to consider when you're looking at supply chains. It's interdependence is actually an efficiency method to make things better. And how far are you going to go with your interdependence is what I think we came up with the pandemic, and with the all of a sudden chips weren't available, or maybe they were, but another interesting point is looking at this Valley of Death thing. So I was also ran Fraunhofer USA centers. There are Fraunhofer USA centers for a couple of years. And one of the first things I experienced in the US was going to a meeting of a European, US, something in Washington, and the US speakers would come up and say, we're so good in basic research and we have all these research results, but we can't get them into products. Look at the iPhone, there are 90 European patents in there. The Europeans are so much better in getting these patents in. And I was like, well, in Europe, you talk about the European paradox being exactly the same thing, being, we're so good in basic research and we have all these, but we're not good in the products. And they will then pull out pull out the iPhone and say, look, the iPhone, it's Apple makes them. And they forget that there are 90 European patents in there. And you think about it for a while and you realize, no, there's something to be gained by collaborating here, because the Valley of Death is different on both sides of the Atlantic. In the US, it's right after university, right after you have the result. Nobody will give you money for a prototype. You have to find your own prototype. Once you have the prototype, bingo, then the venture capitalists trust you. So they see the product. In Europe, No, Fraunhofer. We make prototypes. COALETI makes prototypes. So in Europe, you can go from the university to the RTO and get the prototype, and then you're dead in the water. Because in Europe, nobody will believe that you can scale this.
Exactly. Yeah. No, but definitely, you have to put your money where your mouth is and focus, and also give great directions. So I think that with the European policy now, they have identified key areas, and when the ecosystem knows where funding is, of course, there is a rush towards those poles of interest. I somehow realized that I skipped one slide, which was about the US-EU collaboration. So if you can put it back. But this is indeed what you were mentioning. My family company was an electronics company. We were small, medium business. As soon as we issued a patent in the United States, we had immediately joint venture requests and collaboration requests from the United States. In Europe, no. So it is indeed a different dynamic. We can learn from each other. We can bring our talents together to have a much, much higher acceleration of innovation on both sides.
I want to add one thing, because I think if you look at focus and what you're good at, right? I think it's very important to keep focus. Your example is very strong, I think, but also to acknowledge that the one part is stronger in one thing and the other is stronger in the other. And I think that you can be complementary. So you can't do it all in once, because it takes years of investment, it takes years of research. And I think acknowledging that you have certain strengths, for example, in Europe, and certain strengths in the US, I think is very clear. This is exactly how it goes in Europe. We do the prototyping, and this is what you RTOs do, right? You do the prototyping, but the scaling, we're not good in the scaling. That's where the US is good at. Absolutely. And I think it's the same. For example, we're extremely good in equipment, in wafer fab equipment. We have invested heavily in this. We will keep investing in this, and because we want to stay strong in it. And the same, I think, goes for the US, right? You want to have the production of the chips close. So this is where the collaboration is. Figure out where the strengths are on both sides and collaborate on that.
And I would like to highlight maybe one last item, and it's about, in terms of strength, the sustainability aspect. So we are in an era, of course, so we are just out of the COP28. Why do we need to speed up innovation? Because we have real emergencies at the planetary scale that are coming up. So bringing together a culture of sustainability and design together with indeed this scale up and this entrepreneurial energy and vision, I think that this is going to be a winning cocktail.
So I think we're about done with this. I'm sorry that the audience didn't get to ask a question, but I think that the discussion here was so rich that it was worth just keeping the conversation open. Thank you, all of you. This is a really very rich and very productive conversation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. If you could take your seats for the final session of this afternoon. My name is David Matthews. I'm the international editor at Science Business. So I cover basically the EU's science and technology relations with the wider world, hence why I'm chairing this panel. And so this panel is really the three great representatives of, because the companies that are designing and actually making the chips that we've been talking about this whole afternoon. And we've heard from a lot of policymakers, a lot of policy thinkers, but this is their chance to vent or politely suggest things to all of the policymakers and policy thinkers in the room or watching online. So I'll just introduce them briefly. So to my left we have Alessandro Curioni, who is director of IBM Research in Zurich. And my far left here, we have Arko Kriegsmann, head of public-private partnerships at ASML. And in the middle, we have Riccardo Masucci, who is director of security and technology policy at Intel. So I will kick off. One of the things we haven't really talked about much, I think, this afternoon, when we're thinking about how to enable transatlantic research cooperation, is research and mobility. You know, how easy is it for people to transfer between the US and the EU? So, Alessandro, as an Italian working at a Swiss lab for a US headquartered business, maybe you can kick us off. You know, how difficult is it to make that transition across the Atlantic?
Yeah, look, I do believe that probably the question better pose, it is easy enough, okay? Because, you can always solve problems. I do believe that we do need to create a better environment and better policy that facilitates, the movement, the growth of people around semiconductor in this particular technology. And by the way, we cannot put all in the same buckets and say, look, this is something general. We are speaking about semiconductors that is a major enabler of IT, that is a major enabler of everything is happening in AI, in good and bad, right? So it's something that is very special and require very, very specialized skills, not only, from the engineers, from the hardware architects, but also from the people that are leading these companies, okay, that are leading these developments. So trying to facilitate, or make easier the movement of skills and people, it's vital.
So, I mean, do you have problems at IBM getting people to and between different research centers in the US and Switzerland, or elsewhere in Europe, or elsewhere in the world? What's the situation?
There are always a problem. I saw you find solution, right? But and being, global companies, this is easier for us. Yeah. So if you don't have the right skill in one place, you can get the right skill on the other. But if you think about the ecosystem, taking down barrier, it is really very, very, very important. And by the way, during the discussion today, I have heard a couple of times people saying, we are companies, we are R&D centers, we are here to implement policies. Wrong. The industry is where, the know-how is in this type of things. And the industry has to work in order to morph the policy in the right way. Also, in exchange between talents, between, what people have referred like-minded countries. So it's not only a question to be passive, especially in a technology like this. We need, to help the policymakers to take the right decision. Because if you do that wrong, everything else is wrong. People are at the center of everything, right?
Keeping the topic on people, would anyone else like to come in on the question of mobility? How do you get a free flow, seamless free flow of researchers, technicians, etc., in the semiconductor industry, particularly between the US and the EU? Anyone else?
Well, I can take this, and it's indeed a great point. Both the EU and the US CHIPS Act acknowledge the need to mobilize talent for R&D. It's an important point. Visa facilitation and creating better conditions for free movement of researchers is indeed really important. But besides that, I think that we need to create also the right conditions for people to relocate on the other side of the Atlantic, right? And so a number of services that today are a bit scattered in member states or in the US, trying to create a one-stop shop for services for researchers and workers could be indeed an opportunity here. And then I wanted to mention one low-hanging fruit, or one bright example of mobility of researchers is linked to shuttle programs that are offered by companies. We will start as of 2025 to offer access to our pilot, to our lines, to our production lines for 18A, which is one of the new angstrom technologies for chips. And this will be for researchers and for SMEs, because once again, this is the struggle between for transferring actually from lab to fab, no, from basic research to commercialization of those research findings.
So the shuttle service, what it allows, international mobility more easily. I mean, how would that facilitate kind of researchers moving between countries, or is this something slightly different?
It's definitely a good example of mobility, right? Where we create an incentives for researchers to use facilities that are available, and not just to researchers in the region, but creating more mobility and more exchanges among regions.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Arco, you have something to contribute.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, because I think we all, both sides of the Atlantic, we're seeing that in terms of the discussion around migration, the nuance in the debate seems to degrade as we move in time. And I think that requires us as a sector to really work together to provide a counterweight to that direction, because I think restrictions on migration, especially for the talents that we all need, are going to hamper the progress in our industry. And I think that is something to bear in mind. I think in terms of the globalization of the industry and the type of talents that we're getting in, for us, we're getting more than half of the new people that are coming to work for us are non-Dutch people. So diversity, I think, is a big plus, but hampering migration will certainly limit us in our growth.
I mean, I guess it's tricky because I guess migration and visas is not within the EU's competency, and of course the US will struggle to pass any serious migration reform legislation. But so you need to work together as an industry somehow to kind of grease the wheels of mobility, maybe, or even if the politicians have struggled to make any substantive changes, possibly in the near future. I also want to talk about the kind of shape of the two. Kind of R&D aspects of the EU's and the US's CHIPS legislation. So obviously they're both putting quite a lot of money into R&D. I think it's about 11 billion both sides, funneled through different mechanisms that we've heard about today. Can you talk about how they compare in terms of the kind of R&D structures that are envisaged? And which one you're kind of more comfortable with? I mean, we heard from the European JU earlier, but there's also a lot of stuff going on in the US, the Department of Defense, the Commerce, etc., the new NSTC. Maybe Arco, if you'd like to kick us off about this.
There's, I think, from our perspective, a few things that were, well, being originally more a European-based company. Obviously, Europe is where we feel a bit more at ease, even though we still have around 20% of our workforce in the US. So we do have a significant presence there. But if I take, say, the approach towards collaboration and working together, the kind of sharing risks and rewards that we're used to in working with our partners, Zeiss is one of them. Trumpf in Germany is one of them. IMEC for sure is one of them already from the start. So that has always been part of the nature. And I think if you look into the past, for example, the development of EUV was initially started as a cooperation between US and EU. So the EUV LLC, I think you will recognize, is a US based. We had in Europe, we had the Euclid program funded by the European Union. I think in 2000 or 2001, the first results of the EU project were published and discussed at SPIE. Yes. So I think keeping this openness and also the working together on a sharing risks and reward basis is something to keep and to work on towards the future.
Okay, so kind of more consortia based, which is perhaps more of the EU's focus, because I mean the EU is itself a giant consortium, I guess, in a sense. So this is perhaps something you're a bit more comfortable with than maybe the US, but obviously clearly the US will be very, the US program will be extremely helpful, I'm sure, to ASML as well.
Yeah, I think both work in the current, I would say, implementation of how the CHIPS Act, how we observe it. It's more on a one-on-one basis on the US side still. And I think with the next steps with the NSTC and all the other, I think the opening up towards more collaborative type of work will, but I think that's still in the future. Whereas right now, I think the take that we have in Europe is already a consortium-based approach.
Yeah, maybe to add, also in the discussion that we have had today and the presentation that were done, right? I do believe that we are still too tepid in the way we are really trying to foster the collaboration between the two CHIPS Acts and transatlantic ones. And many people have said, look, we have to do these things because we cannot afford replication because this is throwing away money. Come on, that is a linear effect. Okay, the reason why we should collaborate more is that because if we collaborate, there are synergies and network effect that grows like the square of the interaction that you are having. So making silos, and the person of IMEC said very well, is not only bad, it's bad to the square. Yes?
Bad squared. What is that? Mathematic. Okay, sorry, go on, Rick. So it's too tepid. You think we're being too tepid in how we're actually encouraging transatlantic R&D cooperation on semiconductors between the two schemes. I mean, we saw earlier that, I mean, there's opportunities for collaboration, I feel like, around the edges of these two schemes, but they do seem to, they're clearly focused on either the EU or the US. Do we need to think, bigger about how to encourage collaboration? Maybe, Ricardo, you can take this up.
Well, this is the point, no? Because on both sides of the Atlantic, we have now R&D, huge R&D focus on semiconductors. And as a company who has operated in Europe manufactured in Europe actually over 30 years, we have been involved in a number of EU R&D collaborative projects. We are still participating in probably a dozen of these projects as we speak these days. But the real change now would be for the EU and the US. Instead of opening their programs to the other side of the Atlantic, start thinking of some joint programs where there are common funds that are put together. And so this creates really a completely different situation, because there are some issues linked, for instance, to IP handling, right, and licenses, etc., that should be addressed together. And these are some of the issues that today make the collaboration in some cases more difficult. Or
yeah, no, I mean, that would be a big move to have a joint scheme, joint funding. I don't know, maybe someone in the room can make it happen, but yeah, that would be certainly different from the current situation, which is what you have Horizon Europe, so you can apply as a US body to join that, but you won't get any money. And clearly it's under kind of European jurisdiction, EU jurisdiction, but yeah, something joint would be, yeah, I mean, that would be an entirely new level of kind of bilateral partnership, but yeah, it sounds like it's something that industry might want. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that kind of idea, whether you think that would be a good one.
Well, I think I'm thinking along as I start talking about this, but let's see how that goes. I think with over the past year, for example, I think we have been cooperating with Intel in one of the EU-based projects under the CHIPS joint undertaking. So I think that is already showing that this is something that we are already doing, and I think as long as some of the US entities, and Intel is one of them, they have some staff on European soil to also do R&D. Same with IBM, and I think those having these mutual R&D teams across the ocean, then still there would need to be, well, I think Andreas from Infineon also mentioned it, we need a level playing field in terms of the rules around protect and promote. And I think that's really essential to have that, to make it actually work, and to have the fruits of all the R&D also end up in products. And well, again, I said it, the sharing risks and reward, to really make that part of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this leads us on to kind of IP cultures and how you share IP between these collaborations. I don't know if anyone wants to speak about that. I mean, you know, if you're collaborating in the US or in the EU, how are the cultures different in terms of sharing IP? And you know, what changes could policymakers make to make collaboration a little bit easier?
Look, I do believe that you know, this is a process that has to be done step by step, and to have the full community also to understand better the value of IP. And somebody has shown a map, you know, before about the different components and pieces that, you know, you have inside something that then create value, okay, so a device. And there are so many different pieces, and if you look competencies and ability to create a really differentiated IP is different in US and in EU. You have company, you have research institution. So I do believe that is more a question of alignment, right, than, you know, to find better ways, you know, to share everything, because the sharing everything is very complex, right? There are certain things that you know what is the value, other things that you don't know that there is value. Many companies has even stopped, you know, to patent, you know, in many fields and keep things as a trade secret. You know, it's not so simple, right?
Right. Okay. Anyone else?
Well, speaking of IP, I think that we need to distinguish between what we are looking when we are looking at IP at the angle of competitiveness, and both the EU and the US know very well what is the value of IP, and both the EU and the US have taken steps to protect IP against leakage, against theft, and IP protection was part of the policy debate both in the US CHIPS Act and the EU CHIPS Act. I was involved in here in Brussels in the lawmaking process for the EU CHIPS Act, and there were huge discussions, especially in the European Parliament, to make sure that the text would reflect some guardrails, let's say, for countries of concern. But at the same time, having these measures to protect IP against some countries shouldn't impinge the ability for like-minded countries to work together. And this comes to the second aspect that I wanted to emphasize, which is collaboration. So on the one side, competitiveness, on the other side is collaboration. And so together, EU and US should find ways to improve the rules and the conditions for the two sides of the Atlantic to participate in R&D programs, to have collaborations, and handle aspects like IP that are indeed very important, because IP is also where value stands for our industry, and it's because of innovation that this industry can strive. And this is what is driving, you know, Moore's law and the innovation in our sector. So it's a very important aspect.
That's interesting. So these kind of walls going up around IP to protect it against, I guess, non-like-minded countries, and we can all guess who that is probably directed against, is actually putting up barriers between places like the US and the EU, who are in theory like-minded countries. Has anyone else seen evidence of this kind of greater restrictions, greater IP trickiness because of the geopolitical situation impacting countries that should otherwise be kind of friends? Maybe not. Maybe that's good news.
I would say that you know, there's been a polarization, yeah, recently. If you go back, you know, since the beginning of semiconductor industries, you know, semiconductor industry was able to flourish thanks to alliances of different type in which, you know, there was IP sharing amongst companies that, you know, they were pursuing the same thing. And that is this type of collaboration that helped, you know, with the right rules, with the right guardrails to push the industry further. So now we get to a point in which exactly probably for geopolitical reason, all the discussion on IP is not for the value that bring to companies and eventually to organizations and states, but become, you know, a geopolitical discussion. So that's where things become much more tricky. But again, especially between US and Europe, we are here to discuss about collaboration, to discuss about synergies. And I do still believe that, yes, we are doing something together, but we could do much more. It's seen like nice to have, but in my opinion, it has to be a must. If we want, you know, to create this technology for what I would say our world, okay? We were thinking about like Mandy countries, you know, that is our world.
Before we go on to Q&As, let's see how we're doing for time. Yeah, there's also this issue of eligibility for funds under the various schemes that have been launched in the US and the EU. I'd just like to ask all of you, in what sense does it even make sense to talk about a US company or an EU company anymore because your research and operations are so globalized? I mean, politicians, you know, they tend to think, okay, this is one of ours, this is one of theirs, but I kind of get the sense that it's now so diversified that it's these kind of criteria for eligibility in these schemes, you may think they're a little bit outdated. I don't know if anyone would like to pick that up.
Yeah, maybe. Let me start. Look, I do believe that we have to go over some of these things because most, both in US and in Europe, of the players in these fields are global as companies. So you can say IBM is not a European headquartered company, so should not participate, you know, to the funds. I would answer that, you know, IBM had the first R&D place outside US in Europe 75 years ago when most of the companies that exist today, they were not existing. And we are having, you know, around 100,000 employees in Europe. So if you do the math, it means that every year at least 10 billions of dollars go in the pocket of these employees that pay probably 5 billions of taxes every year in Europe. So would you consider that a non-European company? Question mark. 5 billions per year is more than all the numbers that we have discussed today.
Any other thoughts? Rest of the panel? No, thank you. That's very strident. Go on. Okay.
Yeah, I think I share the view that indeed the base of where your headquarter is should not define whether you should be eligible. I think it's where the work is done and where these people work and into what ecosystem or from which ecosystem locally they feed. Because I think in order to really nurture R&D and innovation, there is a level of proximity that is needed. The fact that innovation works is because sometimes people are within walking, driving, or in the Netherlands, cycling distance from each other. So that really helps foster innovation. So there's these local ecosystems that should be supported through the local acts wherever they are. And they should not be limited by boundaries around where the headquarters are.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, incredibly globalized supply chain, but also distance still very much matters when it comes to innovation. Before we go to a Q&A, Ricardo, anything else you'd like to add on this about the headquarter issue?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. Over the last couple of years, we saw clearly that the US and the EU have very similar objectives when it comes to semiconductor policies. So both regions are trying to bring back manufacturing in the EU, in the US. Both regions are trying to strengthen their technology leadership. And so it is clear that what we are doing on both sides of the Atlantic is not just very compatible, but we should think of these two regions as one big transatlantic ecosystem, which means that we continue growing, let's say, the regional supply chains, but we keep in mind that we operate in a much broader space. And this leads me to the second point, which is the challenges from an R&D perspective that we are facing are not regional challenges, right? And so collaboration needs to be global in that sense. Take, for instance, our objectives, our industrial policy objectives. We want to decarbonize while re-industrialize our economies, right? And if we don't find some replacements, for instance, in time for some chemicals, for some substances that are critical and essential to the to our manufacturing activities, both the EU and the US won't be able to achieve those goals. And so that's why I see even more that trying to separate and have regional approaches is not really conducive to the global challenges that we are trying to face.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So those. Yeah. I mean, the challenges. I mean, it's fairly obvious, but yeah, they're very similar everywhere on both sides of the Atlantic, and therefore a kind of a transatlantic ecosystem makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay. Any questions from the audience? I mean, these are the people making the chips, so you must have some questions. So yeah, we'll go for Charles. Just here.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by some of the questions here and there. I'd be interested in the views from Intel and IBM. And the question is very simple. Cooperation is accelerating. There is much more activity in IMEC and in LETI, where IBM has played a role for many years. Intel is extremely active in IMEC. We just heard them talking about cooperating with New York Creates and how essential and complementary that is. The questions about IP, I'm bemused. If you don't protect the IP, you don't have cooperation. IMEC lives on protecting IP. It's essential. It's not an obstacle, it's a highway. And the CHIPS Act is not going to send money to Europe, but they'll give money to Infineon, they'll give money to ARM, they'll give money to Samsung. I would think that's okay. I mean, and Intel is certainly getting funds from the German government and potentially the EU CHIPS Act. I don't know IBM's position, but the point is that they've benefited from this for a long time. So the idea that there's a separation, that IP is a problem, and that the CHIPS and EU Act are not cross-fertilizing seems to me to be misplaced. Please correct if that's wrong.
Yeah. It's not that I think that we have all said, it's not that there is not. I think that we should do more and better. That's all.
Yes.
That's the message. And you know, because this is not a technology, it's the technology. It's not, you know, something that we can do it, yeah, we are happier. No, there are problems. There are problems. We need to solve this problem because we have to collaborate better. That's the message.
I think there was another question at the back there.
Thank you very much. Just if you could list 3 things that you would require from institutions, multi-government institutions on both sides of the Atlantic to support collaborations. As you were saying before, if collaborations are there, but they're not there enough, and institutions are around us and support us, what those 3 things could be, excluding money.
Which is...
So no mention of money, apparently. Well, you can mention money if you want to. Go on. Who would like to kick off with 3 things?
I'll start at least with a kickoff. From my personal perspective, for any innovation to work, and that also holds for innovation through cooperation, you essentially need through 3 things. You need good ideas, you need the right people to do it, and I'm sorry, you still need the funds, right? So those would be and how to get there and how to get that supported, I think requires an alignment and a continuous discussion between all the parties that are involved. So that means government, industry, and the research institutes that have to provide the ideas should be around the table to coordinate where they want to go and how they want to continue the cooperation.
Yeah, I would say, as I was saying at the beginning, simplify transborder movement of talents and of people. That is one thing. Simplify, because you can do it, but can be done better. The second thing that I would say, we are here to speak about after US has its own CHIPS Act and the EU had its own CHIPS Act, how the things work together, eventually start and move more for this technology on a joint strategy, right? Not a posteriori thing. That would help a lot. Yeah, not for today, but for the future. And then, yes, the third thing, but that require help from everybody. Try to improve the trust, I would say, transatlantic trust in general. Very often you say, and also today, when you say, but politics is politics, what if, this change? What if this other thing change? Yes, that is a real world. But in spite that there are things that are changing in leadership, in things that you cannot control directly, yeah? Building a trust, connecting with this fundamental technology, that independently, who has a political power is going to remain a fundamental technology, that if you don't work together, we risk to remain behind. Yeah, is crucial.
Great, thank you. That's very clear. Ricardo, your three key priorities for EU or US institutions.
Really difficult. A lot was already covered. I would say talent, a favorable regulatory environment on both sides of the Atlantic for research, including, financial, non-financial incentives for research. More coordination between the EU and the US. Someone
malfunctioning
is,
chip, maybe?
someone is on a call. And so, and probably the third point is more coordination, but not just EU and US coordination, but try to use this strength in a way to influence also other international fora and discussions. And I look, for instance, at OECD, which is an organization with a lot of like-minded countries, where the EU and the US can really make a difference in steering somehow the direction of the policy debate.
Well said.
Thank you. That's very clear. Oh, we have, I think, time for one more question here. I will grant you my microphone.
Joachim Rodriguez, Lund University in Sweden. So I take up the comment from Arkeo. So you had 3 points. That was, what was it? The money, the idea, and the people. Let's assume we have all that. And these people are like-minded and they are free to travel. So how can we collaborate? What would be the next step? So we're willing to collaborate with the US. What can we do? Who should we talk to?
Thinking about that question, yeah, because there's some assumption under there that that is not yet the case, which I think there is. I think that's also what I try to highlight is the whole journey for us being able to develop EUV has been an example of the cooperation, and I think that is something to build on, and maybe there are indeed lessons learned and there's things to improve, but we already have a solid base, and I think it's more looking towards the future. Okay, how can we improve the already ongoing connections, because they are there. I think the cooperation with IMEC in that sense goes hand in hand with the center in Albany. almost two decades further along. 15 years ago, it was on the initial EUV tools, and today it's on the high-NA version of EUV. So I think from that perspective, we are along the right lanes in that. And by having sessions like this, by having people meet, I think this is what will help raise it to the next level.
Agree. Probably there is now time for a sort of paradigm shift also in the role of governments in all this, because besides the fact that governments, may create on both sides of the Atlantic a favorable regulatory environment for companies, etc. But there are small initiatives, and I was mentioning the fact, for instance, of creating some sort of one-stop shops for those that are relocating, both workers and researchers. Or think of the possibility also for governments to zoom out and not look only at the semiconductor sector, but at the whole industry. The semiconductor sector needs to have upskilling and reskilling activities, right? Because we need there's a skills shortage. But so far, this was done by the individual companies, and we should somehow try to shift the burden or somehow ask for more help, from governments in seeing which are the sectors in the economy that are suffering right now and would need more upskilling and reskilling to be redirected to sectors that are actually in need of more skills and more workers. So what I'm saying is that probably there's a new role also for governments in close cooperation with industry.
I'll leave the final comment of the day to you, Alessandro.
I do believe that we go back to what we were saying before, right? We have to go away from the tendency, look, I can do everything, or I want to do everything. First thing, look at your organization, your country, and see what makes you unique on this field. Once you define that, put this in the table. So that is the best way, in order to amplify the outcome. Yeah? So find what you can do better, or you think you can do better than the other, and then put on the table. That is my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's, what's the time? Almost 6 o'clock. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. I hope we've had some fruitful discussions about policy, about politics, about research. And so we have now our Christmas reception, which is 2 floors up on the 7th floor. And you're all very welcome to come and continue the conversation up there. And yeah, so thank you on behalf of Science Business and CSIS for attending, both in person and online. It's been a very entertaining afternoon. I feel like I've learned a lot about the sector. And yeah, can you give a final round of applause to our final panelists and everyone else who's made the evening possible? Thank you.